When you are responsible for protecting a remote Arctic settlement, you learn to read silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that means something very large is holding its breath. Last month, 8 people went into the Kotzebue wilderness, 4 came back. What they told me broke every rule I have followed in 23 years of rangering. But what I did not tell the authorities, that is why I am writing this down. My name is Richard Hernandez. I have been a park and forest ranger for the Kotzebue region of Alaska for just over 2 decades. During that time, I have seen bears, moose, wolverines, and the kinds of cold that make your blood slow down. I have never, in all those years, experienced anything that I could not explain within the framework of wildlife biology and environmental science. Until the summer when Amanda Lopez arrived on the northern route. Amanda was 55 years old, a researcher whose credentials involved something I did not fully understand at the time. She arrived in July with 2 assistants, Christopher Anderson, 44, and Lauren Thomas, 61. They carried equipment I had never seen before. Not tracking tools, not observation devices. Something else. Something that seemed designed to measure absence rather than presence. I met them at the ranger station on a Tuesday. The sky was that particular shade of pale blue that comes during the endless daylight. Amanda did not waste time on pleasantries. "We are looking for something," she said. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. "Everything here is something," I replied. "You will need to be more specific. There have been reports. 4 in the last 18 months. Hikers who went missing for brief periods and returned with memory gaps. Footage from trail cameras that shows movement patterns inconsistent with known fauna. And," she pulled out a satellite image, "thermal anomalies that appear and disappear in a way that suggests deliberate evasion." I looked at the image. It showed heat signatures moving through terrain where no animal should have moved that way. The pattern was too purposeful, too intelligent. "What are you actually looking for?" I asked. "We will know it when we find it," she said. That should have been my warning. Within a week, they had permits and a team assembled. Daniel Taylor, 50, was a specialist in animal behavior with a focus on apex predators. Rachel Moore, 35, handled the technical equipment. Matthew Jackson, 42, was their logistics coordinator. And Nicole Martin, 58, was their guide, a woman who had lived in Kotzebue her entire life and knew the interior territories better than almost anyone. I was assigned to oversee the expedition. Protocol, safety oversight, standard procedure for any outside research in protected areas. "We will be hiking into the interior," Amanda told me on the morning of departure. "Following a grid pattern. We expect to be out for 7 days. What is your actual research objective?" I pressed. "We are studying population dynamics of large herbivores," she said. Which was a lie. I knew it then. I know it now. The 8 of us set out on a Wednesday morning. The 5 researchers, Nicole Martin as guide, myself, and Marcus Webb, a younger ranger who had only been with us for 2 seasons. The weather was clear. The temperature was 12 degrees Celsius. The landscape around Kotzebue is not forested in the traditional sense. It is tundra, open, rolling terrain with stunted vegetation, ancient permafrost, and a kind of emptiness that makes you understand how small you truly are. We hiked for 2 days without incident. We reached our first survey point, and Amanda's team set up their equipment. I watched them work. They were not looking for tracks. They were not measuring vegetation or taking samples. They were pointing their instruments upward and outward, sweeping the landscape as if searching for something in the air itself. "What exactly are those instruments measuring?" I asked Rachel. "Electromagnetic signatures," she said without looking up. "Anomalies in local field variance. That makes no sense for herbivore research." "No," she agreed, "it does not." On the 3rd day, Nicole came to my tent in the early morning. She looked frightened in a way that I had never seen before. "There is something wrong," she said. "I have guided in this territory for 38 years. The animals are wrong. The birds are not calling. The ground feels wrong." "Feels how?" "Like something is watching it from below." I told her she was tired, that the remoteness was affecting her perception. I was the authority. I was the experienced ranger. I did not want to believe that she might be sensing something true. By that evening, all of us felt it. It was not visible. It was not a sound exactly. It was a pressure. A sense of mass moving through the landscape just beyond our ability to detect it properly. Daniel and Rachel confirmed that their instruments were registering fluctuations unlike anything in their databases. "We need to continue," Amanda said. She did not look afraid. She looked hungry. That night I heard something moving through the perimeter of our camp. It was not a large animal. It was something larger than any animal I knew. I heard it displace stones. I heard it breathe. When I looked out of my tent, I saw only the pale twilight and the empty tundra. Nothing was there. But the space where nothing was there felt heavy with presence. On the fourth day, we found the first site. It was a ridge approximately 2 kilometers from our camp. Rachel's instruments had led us there. The location itself was unremarkable. Tundra like every other stretch of tundra in the interior. But the ground told a different story. There were impressions in the earth, not footprints. Something larger and less specific. As if something enormous had lain in a particular spot repeatedly, compressing the ground and vegetation in a pattern that suggested the weight of something that should not exist in these territories. The impressions measured nearly 4 meters across. How long? I asked Amanda. The vegetation damage suggests weeks, she said. Perhaps months. Months? Nicole's voice was sharp. It has been here for months? The thermal anomalies in the satellite data extended back 16 months, Amanda confirmed. So yes, at least that long. I felt something shift in the composition of my understanding. There was something in this territory, something large, something that had learned to evade detection or, more unsettling, had learned to hide despite being impossible to fully hide. We need to go back, I said. We are just beginning to get useful data, Amanda replied. That is not the point. We have evidence of an unknown large fauna present in an area where 8 people are hiking. That presents an unacceptable safety risk. All research involves risk, Amanda said. Research does not involve an unknown apex predator in a remote region with limited extraction options. But even as I was saying this, I knew that Amanda would not turn back, and I suspected that she had never intended to turn back. The others, Christopher, Daniel, Rachel, they were looking at the impressions with expressions of professional interest, but there was something else underneath, relief. As if they had expected to find evidence of something extraordinary and were now having their expectations confirmed. We continued deeper. That afternoon, Matthew spotted a cave. It was small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through the entrance, but it was positioned on a south-facing ridge with good visibility of the surrounding terrain. The kind of location an intelligent creature might choose to maintain awareness of its environment. Amanda wanted to investigate. I refused. That is where I draw the line, I said. We do not enter enclosed spaces where we cannot see what is inside. For the first time, Amanda looked at me with something other than professional interest. She looked at me the way a person looks at an obstacle they will eventually have to remove. The cave is clearly a site of significant interest for our research, she said. The cave is off limits, I replied. Nicole stood beside me. Matthew and Rachel exchanged a look. Daniel was examining the cave entrance with the kind of focus usually reserved for something he was about to do despite being told not to. We made camp a safe distance away. That night, I kept watch with a rifle that I hoped would be ineffective against whatever was in these territories. The hope itself felt like faith, fragile and inadequate. Around midnight, I heard it again. The large thing. It was close, perhaps only 200 meters from our camp. It moved deliberately, not like a predator stalking. Like something conducting an inspection, verifying our position, assessing our capabilities. And then, around 3 in the morning, it did something that I could not explain. It called, not with sound, not precisely. It was a compression of the air itself, a frequency that I felt in my chest rather than heard with my ears. The call lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It contained what I can only describe as intention, a question perhaps, or a warning. The entire camp woke. Rachel actually gasped. Daniel was on his feet, weapon drawn. Nicole was pale. Amanda stood at the edge of the camp and looked out toward the direction the sound had originated. She was smiling. It knows we are here, she said. It is responding to our presence. We need to go back now, I said. We will continue tomorrow, Amanda replied. But tomorrow did not come the way I expected it to. On the 5th day, we split the group. I did not authorize this, but I was outvoted through a process that I barely registered happening. Amanda suggested that we would cover more ground if we split our resources. Daniel and Matthew would take Rachel and conduct a survey of the northern ridgeline. Amanda, Christopher, and Nicole would remain at the camp and analyze the data we had collected. I would conduct a perimeter survey and attempt to locate additional sites. This is a terrible idea, I said. This is necessary science, Amanda replied. I left with provisions for a full day. The plan was to return by evening. I marked my path carefully and maintained regular distance checks. I documented everything I observed. I was doing my job, but I was also abandoning my responsibility. I was perhaps 3 kilometers from camp when I first realized I was not alone. Not by sound or sight, but by that same sense of presence that had defined the last 3 days. It was moving parallel to me, maintaining distance, testing, perhaps, or simply observing the observer. I stopped. I stood completely still for nearly 5 minutes. The thing stopped as well. I could not see it. I could not hear it clearly. But the space behind me, about 60 meters distant and slightly to the left, felt heavy with weight and attention. I continued walking. It continued following. The dynamic persisted for the entire day. When I returned to camp as the sun was entering its brief dip toward the horizon, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The camp was too silent. There were no voices, no movement. Amanda, Christopher, Nicole, and Nicole's equipment were all present. Nicole was not. "Where is Nicole?" I asked. Christopher did not answer. He was staring at Amanda with an expression of shock and something that might have been awe. "She went to gather water approximately 3 hours ago," Amanda said. "She did not return." "You let her go alone?" "She volunteered. She is familiar with this territory." I did not see the need to show me where. She showed me. The water source was a small stream approximately 200 meters from camp. Nicole's route would have taken her directly through a depression in the terrain. A natural feature, but one that limited visibility, a natural location for something large to conceal itself. I tracked her footprints. They stopped in the depression. The surrounding vegetation was disturbed. There were impressions in the earth, large impressions, and there was blood on a rock face. Very little blood, which was somehow worse than a large amount would have been. "We need to activate emergency extraction," I said. "Now." But we had satellite phones with limited range. We had communication devices designed for coordinating between team members across short distances. We had no way to call for immediate help from this remote location. The nearest settlement with serious medical facilities was 200 kilometers away. "What happened here?" I asked Amanda. She had followed me to the depression. She was looking at the impressions with a clinical interest that made my hands clench into fists. "I believe it took her," she said. "You believe it what?" "Took her. Collected her. She will be kept alive. It appears to be an intelligence-driven behavior." "You knew," I said. "You knew what was here when you came. You knew, and you did not warn us." Amanda met my eyes. Behind her gaze was the hunger I had seen earlier, now fully exposed. "We have been tracking this creature for 7 years," she said. "Reports from various regions across the Northern Territories, sightings that did not match any known fauna, evidence of intelligence, evidence of intention. You cannot understand what we have found, Ranger Hernandez. You do not have the framework, but I can tell you that it is the most significant discovery in human history. Nicole is missing." Nicole volunteered for field work in a remote location where an unknown large predator is present. She understood the risks. I wanted to hit her. I wanted to do something that would make her understand the magnitude of her betrayal. But Nicole was gone, and we were still in the territory of something that had intelligence enough to choose which of us to take. Daniel and Matthew returned just before dark. Rachel was not with them. They came running into camp, both of them breathing heavily, both of them marked with injuries they would not immediately explain. "It took her," Matthew said. "We were surveying the northern ridge. We were examining a site where we found more of the large impressions. Rachel was taking measurements when..." He stopped. The trauma was visible in his face. "When what?" I demanded. "When it appeared," Daniel said. His arm was bleeding. The wound looked like puncture marks from something very large. Not from where we were looking, from above, from the ridge itself. It was moving on the slope in a way that was absolutely impossible. 4-legged. But the movement was intelligent, tactical. It moved between Matthew and Rachel, isolating her, and then it simply took her, lifted her, carried her away." "Carried her where?" "Toward the cave," Matthew said. "Toward the small cave we found yesterday." I looked at Amanda. She was not shocked. She was taking notes on a tablet computer. "We need to get out of here," I said. "All of us. Now. Tonight. We will move by compass bearing directly toward Kotzebue. We will move through the darkness if necessary. We will not stop until we are within communication range of the settlement." "Some of us are not leaving," Amanda said. I looked at Christopher. He was pale, but his eyes matched Amanda's. He would not leave either. "Then you will stay at your own choice," I said. "But the rest of us are going." "You cannot leave," Amanda said. It was not a request or a suggestion. It was a statement of absolute fact. It will not allow you to leave. It does not have a choice. It does not have authority over my actions. "Ranger Hernandez," Amanda said quietly. "How many are we?" I counted. Myself, Daniel, Matthew, Amanda, Christopher. Nicole and Rachel were gone. 8 started, she continued. 6 remain. But I have been documenting patterns since we arrived. The creature is not random in its selections. It is choosing individuals with specific characteristics. Rachel was a specialist in technical systems. Nicole was a guide, a person with extensive knowledge of the territory. Both would be valuable to an intelligence attempting to understand human technology and human knowledge of this landscape. You are insane. I am accurate, Amanda replied. And it will continue to choose. It will select among us based on utility. We cannot stop it. We can only document what happens and attempt to understand its motivations. I am leaving, I said. But when I stepped beyond the perimeter of our camp, the world changed. It was not sudden. It was more like the atmosphere itself was exerting pressure. A sense of presence so overwhelming that moving forward felt like walking against an impossible wind. The tundra around me felt occupied, as if every square meter of space was being observed and assessed. I took 3 steps beyond the camp perimeter and stopped. The weight of observation was physical, the sense of something vast considering my existence and finding it insufficient, lacking in value. I walked back into camp. You see, Amanda said, it sets the boundaries. We remain here until it permits us to leave. The next morning, I woke to find that 3 of us remained. Daniel and Matthew had gone during the night. I did not hear them leave. I did not hear anything that would have indicated they were in danger. But when dawn came and I checked their sleeping area, they were simply absent. Only Amanda, Christopher, and I remained. Where are they? Christopher asked. His earlier calm had degraded into something closer to panic. Collected, Amanda said. She was looking at her equipment, which had changed. New readings, new data points. The selection process continues. Daniel had expertise in predator behavior. Matthew was a logistics specialist. Both possessed knowledge that would be useful to an intelligence attempting to maintain secrecy while operating in human territories. What does it want with them? Christopher asked. Everything they know, Amanda said. Intelligence, knowledge, understanding of how humans think and plan and anticipate threats. It is killing them, I said. Probably not, Amanda replied. Death would be a waste of resources. I believe it is interrogating them. Extracting information, learning. I sat on a rock outside the tent and tried to process what was happening. We were trapped on the Arctic tundra by an intelligence we could not see, an entity that had taken 4 of our 8 companions, with a researcher who apparently welcomed the situation as an unprecedented scientific opportunity. Why are you still here? I asked Amanda. Why has it not taken you? Because I am useful in a different way, she said. I am documenting what is happening. I am recording data. I am serving as a translator, in a sense, between its existence and your understanding of it. You are collaborating with it. I am facilitating communication, she corrected. You cannot fight an intelligence you do not understand, Ranger Hernandez. You cannot negotiate with a species whose motivations are fundamentally alien to your own experience. The best outcome, the only outcome, is coexistence and mutual learning. Where are Nicole and Rachel and Daniel and Matthew? I asked. Where are they right now? Amanda pointed toward the small cave we had discovered 2 days earlier. The cave is much larger on the interior than the entrance suggests. It extends deep into the ridge. There are networks of tunnels. The creature has habitation there. Nicole and Rachel are likely there. Daniel and Matthew will be brought there. And eventually, Christopher pressed. Eventually it will require additional specimens, Amanda said. As its understanding of human knowledge and behavior increases, it will recognize gaps in its comprehension. It will need to expand its sample. More researchers, more specialists, more data sources. You are describing kidnapping, imprisonment, murder. I am describing necessity, Amanda replied. Evolution, the emergence of a new paradigm in human existence. That is when I understood that I could not trust anyone but myself. Christopher was still in shock, still capable of being reasoned with. But Amanda had crossed a threshold into something beyond collaboration. She was true believing. She had decided that the impossible was not just real but righteous. That night, I made a decision that I still struggle with. I left the camp alone. I did not ask Christopher to join me. I did not tell him what I was planning. I simply walked away and hoped that the creature's attention was elsewhere. And this time, the pressure did not stop me. The weight of observation did not force me backward. I walked for nearly an hour before I realized that the restriction had been selectively applied. It had allowed me to leave because I was not a priority target. I was not a specialist or a researcher or someone whose knowledge would be valuable to an intelligence attempting to understand human capability. I was simply a ranger who had not been useful enough to keep. I walked all night. I navigated by the constellations and by memory of terrain. I tried not to think about the people I was abandoning. By dawn, I had covered approximately 30 kilometers. By the following evening, I had reached the outer settlements of a smaller research station. Within 48 hours, I had been evacuated to Kotzebue. The search and rescue operation that followed was comprehensive but ultimately unsuccessful. When the team returned to our base camp, they found it empty. No bodies, no evidence of struggle, just equipment and supplies arranged as if we had simply ceased to exist. Amanda Lopez and Christopher Anderson were listed as missing persons. No trace of them was ever found. The official investigation concluded that they had become disoriented during a field expedition and likely perished in the Arctic environment. It happens more often than you might think in these territories. The other four, Nicole Martin, Rachel Moore, Daniel Taylor, and Matthew Jackson, were found 2 weeks later, approximately 15 kilometers from where we had camped, walking in a northern direction. They were all alive. They were all, at first, unable to explain what had happened to them. They described periods of missing time, spaces in their memory where hours or days had simply not been recorded in their consciousness. When they were examined at the medical facility in Kotzebue, there was no physical evidence of abuse, no wounds, no signs of malnutrition, no indicators of the trauma you would expect from abduction and captivity. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and psychologically damaged but physically intact. When I attempted to interview them about what had happened, they refused to speak. Not out of trauma, but out of what appeared to be deliberate refusal, as if discussing what they had experienced would somehow breach a contract they had made during the period of their captivity. The official reports that I filed described equipment failure, disorientation, and a series of tragic choices that led to 2 members of the expedition becoming lost. I did not mention the creature. I did not mention the impressions in the earth or the sound that was not a sound or the overwhelming sense of presence that had trapped us in that small camp. I knew that no one would believe me. More importantly, I knew that telling the truth would guarantee that other expeditions would be sent, other researchers would come, other people would be taken. So I lied. And the lie became the official record. And Nicole and Rachel and Daniel and Matthew were eventually released back into civilian life, functioning but changed. They found jobs in other territories. They built lives that appeared normal, but were, I suspect, fundamentally altered by what they experienced beneath that small cave on the Arctic tundra. That was 11 months ago. I have continued my work as a park ranger in the Kotzebue region. I have been questioned extensively by various state and federal agencies about what happened during the expedition. I have maintained my official story. I have said nothing about the truth, but the truth has not ceased simply because I have been silent about it. The impressions in the tundra continue to appear. Different locations each season, but always in the interior territories where human activity is minimal and detection is difficult. The thermal anomalies continue to register on satellite equipment, always in locations that align with the pattern of impressions, and occasionally hikers report missing equipment, missing time, or strange sounds on the wind that cannot be explained by any fauna known to exist in these latitudes. Last month, a family of 4 went hiking in the interior. They were missing for 6 hours. When they returned to the settlement, they were all crying, but they would not explain why. The father walked into the administration office and submitted an official report stating that they had become disoriented and found their own way back. Nothing more. I know what happened. They were visited, assessed, released, presumably deemed unworthy of extended observation or collection. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter. It was from Amanda Lopez. It arrived at the ranger station with no postage and no origin address. The envelope was addressed only to my name. Inside was a handwritten note. Richard, you were not sufficiently useful to collect, but you were sufficiently skilled to survive. That makes you uniquely valuable as a witness and a record keeper. What you have experienced is the edge of a transformation. Our species is no longer alone. We have never been alone, but we are only now beginning to understand what shares our world. The creature, if you can call it that using only the constraints of human taxonomy, is not hostile, despite what you interpret as hostility. It is curious, it is systematic, it is attempting to understand its relationship to the most developed tool-using species on this planet. That is not evil. That is intelligence engaging with intelligence, albeit from dramatically unequal perspectives. Nicole, Rachel, Daniel, and Matthew are alive. They are well. They have chosen to remain in the interior territories in support of continued research and continued peaceful coexistence between our species. They have become something beyond human but not less than human. You have a choice now. You can continue to maintain your silence, which is what we prefer. You can leave this territory and speak your truth to a world that will never believe you, or you can step beyond the barrier that currently constrains you and accept the offer that will eventually come. Either way, you should know, we are coming. Not as an invasion, as a revelation. The long darkness is ending, Richard. You have seen its edge. Amanda, I have not responded to the letter. I have not attempted to trace its origin. I have maintained my position as ranger of this territory for the past 11 months, and I will continue to maintain it. But I know what she meant. I know what the choice represents. I have felt the presence in the tundra many times since I returned. I know that I am being observed. I know that eventually the decision will be made about whether I remain useful enough to preserve or whether I become something more than a witness. Some nights, particularly when the wind is right and the stars are bright in that endless Arctic twilight, I hear the sound again, that compression of air that is not quite sound, that frequency that I feel more than hear. And some nights, I wonder if I am still truly alone here. If the distance that has been maintained between myself and what is truly present in these territories is a choice by them or an accident of circumstance. The tundra is vast, the Arctic sky is endless, and somewhere in the darkness between the settlements and the interior ridges, something is learning what it means to coexist with a species that cannot yet comprehend its existence. This is my account. This is what I have witnessed. This is what I have chosen to record so that if others come after me, they will have a framework for understanding what they encounter. I am a park ranger in Kotzebue, and I have documented something that should not exist in the framework of your understanding. But existence has never been limited by the constraints of belief, and I am no longer certain that I am the one maintaining surveillance of this territory. I think perhaps the surveillance has been mutual all along. The darkness is ending, and something vast is awakening in the place where the light never truly dies. They do not teach you in ranger training what to do when you find a boot on the ice. Just the boot, not the foot, not the leg. Only the boot standing upright as if someone had placed it there with deliberate care, waiting for me to discover it on a Wednesday morning in October when the sun was already fading earlier each day and Barrow, Alaska was beginning its descent into perpetual twilight. My name is Anthony Lee. I am a park ranger at the northernmost edge of the United States, stationed in a place so remote that most people cannot fathom what it means to live where the ocean freezes solid and the sky turns colors that human eyes were not designed to process. I have worked this territory for 12 years. I know every ravine, every frozen lake, every pressure ridge that tears across the pack ice like scars. I have never seen anything like that boot. The call had come in at 6 in the morning. A tourist named Andrew Clark had gone missing on the coastal trail, the one that winds between the gravel bars and the abandoned research stations. Andrew was 32 years old, fit, experienced, the type of visitor who came to Barrow with actual preparation instead of the usual lost souls who arrived expecting to take photographs and leave. His partner Stephanie White had reported him missing when he failed to return to their hotel at sundown. We were hiking, she had told me over the phone, her voice thin and frightened. We separated at the fork near Browerville. He wanted to photograph the northern lights that were starting to show. I wanted to head back. We agreed to meet at the trailhead in 2 hours. She waited 3 hours. Called the rangers, called the police, called his name until her voice broke. The boots sat on the ice 8 miles from where they had separated. I radioed the discovery to my supervisor, Heather Perez, who worked out of the ranger station we shared in town. Heather had been with the service for 19 years. She had seen people disappear before, bear attacks, falls, the occasional hiker with a heart condition who simply lay down in the snow and stopped moving. But she did not have a ready answer for the boot. Search patterns, she said over the radio. Start from that position and work outward. I am calling in Mark Thompson and Stephen Harris. We need a full team. Mark Thompson was our lead ranger, 65 years old, solid as granite, the kind of man who had spent so long in these frozen lands that he seemed to have absorbed something of the ice itself into his bones. Stephen Harris was younger, 53, always eager, always prepared, the type of person who checked his equipment twice and then checked it again before heading into the field. I marked the boot's location with an orange flag and began my search in concentric circles, moving methodically, watching the snow, watching the exposed rocks, watching for any sign of disturbance. The wind blew hard from the north, carrying with it the smell of the ocean and something else, something organic and wrong. I told myself it was seal blubber from a hunter's cache. I told myself it was whale meat that someone had left on the ice. I did not believe myself. The temperature was dropping. It does that in October here. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the wind had a new edge to it, a promise of the freezing darkness that would soon consume us for months. I found the second boot 3 hours later. This one was on a small ridge overlooking a frozen lagoon, a quarter-mile from the first. It was filled with blood. Not fresh blood. It had crystallized in the cold, turning dark and almost black. And it had been there long enough that the crystal patterns had degraded and reformed like the broken surface of the ice itself. I radioed Heather again. Second boot located. Significant hemorrhaging, possible crush injury, or... I paused. I did not want to say it. Or predation. The line went silent for a long moment. "Do not move," Heather said. "Stay on your position. Mark is inbound with Stephen. Do you see anything else?" I looked at the snow around the boot. There were tracks. That is not unusual in Barrow. Everything that moves on the ice leaves tracks. But these were strange. They were wide. They covered impossible distances between steps. And they were not paw prints. They looked like human handprints. All 5 fingers splayed out, but the spacing was wrong. The hand was too large. The depth of the impression suggested weight that no human hand should carry. And they led from the boot in a straight line toward the frozen lagoon. And then they simply stopped. No return tracks. No indication of where the figure had gone. Just an abrupt cessation, as if the thing that made them had simply ceased to exist, or sunk beneath the ice. I did not tell Heather about the handprints. Not yet. I took photographs instead, using my phone to capture the images, the orange flag, the boot filled with blood, the terrible tracks that led nowhere. I told myself that the photographs would help explain what I was seeing, that they would make sense when I showed them to the others. Heather arrived 20 minutes later with Mark Thompson and Stephanie White. Stephanie was still wearing her hiking clothes. Her eyes were swollen from crying. When she saw the boot, she made a sound like an animal in a trap. "That is Andrew's," she said. "That is definitely Andrew's. He bought them in Anchorage the day before we arrived." Mark examined the boot without touching it, moving slowly, deliberately, the way he examined everything in the field. "No sign of Andrew," I said. "Just the boots and other evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Mark asked. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the snow, at the tracks, at something in the distance beyond the frozen lagoon. "Tracks," I said, "leading toward the ice." "Human tracks?" Heather asked. I did not answer immediately. "No," I said finally, "not human." Mark crouched down and examined the blood-filled boot more carefully. He did not touch it either, but he leaned close enough to see inside, to see the caked blood, to see the condition of the leather and how the sole had begun to separate from the upper beneath the weight of frozen plasma. "How far did you search?" Mark asked. 3-mile radius from this point. Nothing. No body. No additional remains. No indication of direction of travel. "He might have gotten turned around," Stephen Harris said. He had arrived with Mark, and he was pulling on his gloves, his eyes scanning the landscape. "Hypothermia can cause disorientation. He might have thought he was heading back but actually walked out onto the thinner ice, fallen through somewhere. That would account for the blood." It was a reasonable explanation. It was the kind of explanation that made sense in a rational world, in a world where things followed patterns that humans could understand and explain away. I wanted to believe it, but I kept seeing those handprints. Wide, splayed, impossible. We searched until the light began to fail. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the twilight of the Arctic afternoon was giving way to something deeper. The temperature was dropping further. Mark decided to call it for the night and reconvene at the ranger station at first light. Before we left, I showed them the photographs. Mark looked at them in silence for a long time. He handed the phone back to me without commenting. Heather studied them more carefully, zooming in on the handprints, on their spacing, on the way they led directly toward the lagoon. "What made these?" Stephanie asked. She was standing behind us, her voice small and frightened. "What kind of animal?" "We do not know yet," Mark said. His voice was careful, controlled. The voice of someone who had decided already what story he would tell himself about what was happening. Could be a bear, could be multiple individuals, could be trail markers that someone placed before the incident. But his eyes kept returning to the photographs, to those impossible handprints. We returned to Barrow as the sky shifted from blue to purple to a kind of deep violet that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees. The wind had shifted to come from the northeast, carrying with it sounds from the ocean, sounds that might have been seals or whales or nothing at all. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, in the employee housing that the government provides. It sits on a rise that looks out toward the Arctic Ocean, and on clear nights I can see the ice stretching away to the horizon. It is beautiful in a way that terrifies me. That night I did not sleep. I kept thinking about Andrew Clark, about what might have happened to him, about the fact that we had found 2 boots but no feet, no legs, no body, about the handprints that made no sense, about what could have left them. At 3 in the morning, I heard something outside my window. It was a sound like breathing, heavy and rhythmic, like something large was standing just outside in the wind, drawing in air and exhaling it with deliberate purpose. I went to the window and looked out at the snow-covered landscape, at the rocks and ice and the distant shapes of the buildings in town. I saw nothing, but I heard the breathing for a long time, an hour, maybe more, long enough that my hands became fists and my jaw clenched so tightly that I thought my teeth might crack. When the sound finally stopped, the silence was worse. I did not leave my house again until the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and colors that had no names. By that time, I had already decided that I would not tell the others about what I had heard. I would tell them about the boots and the tracks, but not about the breathing. Some things, I realized, were too much. Some things, once spoken aloud, became real in ways that silence could not quite force them to be. I did not yet know how wrong I was. The team assembled at the ranger station at dawn. Mark Thompson was there, of course, along with Stephen Harris and Heather Perez. But we had also brought in reinforcements from the state police. Rebecca Ramirez, a detective with 22 years of experience and the kind of presence that made people want to tell her things, and Kimberly Sanchez, a patrol officer with 6 years on the force and the nervous energy of someone always ready for danger. There was also Stephanie White, who had insisted on joining the search, despite our recommendations that she return to her hotel and rest. "I am not resting," she had said, her voice flat and determined. "I am helping. That is what friends do." We spread a topographic map across the table in the ranger station briefing room. The boots had been collected and bagged as evidence. The photographs I had taken were being examined by Rebecca, who had a magnifying glass and was studying the handprints with the focus of someone trying to read meaning in abstract art. "These are not bear paws," she said finally. "I have seen bear damage in my investigations. This is something else." "Wolf?" Stephen suggested. "Wolves do not walk on their hind legs," Rebecca said. She did not look up from the photographs. "These prints are from something that stood upright. Something bipedal, probably a search and rescue team," Kimberly said. "Someone else out there looking for the hiker. They might have come across the boots before us and moved them or left tracks around them." It was possible. It was also exactly the kind of explanation that made everyone present feel better because it meant we did not have to think about what else might have left those tracks. Mark, however, was not satisfied. "The spacing between the handprints suggests a stride length of over 5 feet, he said. "An average human male has a stride of about 2.5 feet. Whoever made these prints was either very tall or not human, or not prints at all," Rebecca said. She set down the magnifying glass. "Could be markings. Could be something that someone made deliberately to confuse us." She looked directly at me when she said it. "I took the photographs exactly as I found them," I said. "Nothing was altered. Nothing was moved except to document it." "I did not say you altered them," Rebecca said. "I said someone might have created false evidence at the scene, someone who wanted to throw us off the trail." It was the first time anyone had spoken aloud the possibility that had been growing in my mind since I found the first boot, that what had happened to Andrew Clark might not have been an accident, that it might have been deliberate. The search pattern expanded. We divided the area into grid squares and assigned teams to search each one. Mark and Stephen took the northern section, the area closest to the ice. Heather and Kimberly took the eastern approach, the ravines and rock formations. Rebecca worked with me on the western grid, the section that included the lagoon and the trail where Andrew and Stephanie had separated. We worked for 3 days without finding anything. No body, no additional remains, no indication of what had happened to Andrew Clark except for the 2 boots and the impossible tracks. On the second evening, I was searching alone on the western edge of our grid, near the old research station that had been abandoned in the 1990s. The station was a cluster of corrugated metal buildings slowly being swallowed by the Arctic elements. The windows were broken or covered with plastic. The doors hung crooked on their hinges. It was the kind of place that tourists found exotic and rangers found simply depressing. I was photographing the ground for evidence of tracks when I heard it, a sound from inside the largest building. A kind of wet, rhythmic slapping. I had my radio. I had my service weapon. I had 12 years of experience and the knowledge that animals in the Arctic were predictable and followed patterns that humans could understand. I approached the building anyway. The door was partially open, hanging on one hinge. The interior was dark, filled with the smell of rust and cold and something organic and faintly sweet. I called out, giving standard warning protocols. "This is Ranger Anthony Lee, United States National Park Service. If there is anyone inside this structure, please identify yourself." No response. I pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The building was mostly empty. Scattered equipment from the old research days. Filing cabinets with drawers hanging open. A table with chairs overturned. Dust covered everything. The windows let in enough of the twilight to see shapes but not details. The slapping sound was coming from the back room. I moved toward it carefully, my flashlight in one hand and my service weapon in the other. I kept telling myself it was an animal, a seal that had somehow found its way inside. A bird trapped in the building, a piece of metal or plastic vibrating in the wind. When I opened the door to the back room, I found Mark Thompson. He was standing with his back to me, facing the far wall, which was covered in frost and ice. He was completely still. His arms hung at his sides. "Mark," I said, "what are you doing here?" He did not turn around. He did not acknowledge that I had spoken. "Mark," I said again, raising my voice. "Respond." Slowly, he turned around. His face was wrong. That is the only way to describe it. Not injured, not distorted by trauma or infection or disease. His features were the same features that had always been there, but they were arranged in a way that human faces do not arrange themselves. His mouth was open too wide. His eyes were positioned at an angle that seemed to suggest his skull had shifted inside his skin, and he was smiling. "You should not be here," Mark said. His voice was Mark's voice, but underneath it there was something else. A second voice, a vibration, a frequency that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to the part of my brain that screamed. I raised my weapon. "Step toward me slowly," I commanded. "Keep your hands visible." Mark took a step forward, then another. He was not moving like Mark. He was moving the way a puppet moves, with joints bending in increments that suggested the strings were being pulled by someone learning the mechanics for the first time. His head tilted at an angle that no human spine could accommodate. I fired a warning shot into the floor between us. The sound echoed through the metal building like a siren. Mark stopped moving. The smile remained on his face. In that frozen moment, I could see something beneath his eyes. Not cataracts, not disease. Something underneath the surface, pressing outward, as if what I was looking at was not Mark Thompson but a mask, and something else was looking out through it. Then Mark blinked. When his eyes opened, they were Mark's eyes again. Recognition flooded back into his face. He looked down at the floor where my bullet had struck, then looked at me, confusion and fear crossing his features in sequence. "Anthony?" he said. His voice was Mark's voice, just Mark's voice. Where am I?" "Ranger Station. I found you here in the back room. Do you remember how you got here?" Mark looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. He moved to a window and looked out at the twilight landscape. His hands were shaking. "I was searching the eastern grid," he said slowly. "I was near the coastal outcropping. I was following a trail of impressions in the snow that I thought might be significant, and then..." He stopped. He did not continue. "And then what?" I pressed. "I do not remember," Mark said. His voice was very quiet. "I do not remember coming here. I do not remember anything after the coast." We left the research station and I radioed the others. Mark was taken back to town for examination, despite his protests that he was fine. Rebecca arrived at the station within 20 minutes and immediately began questioning Mark about his missing time. He could not provide coherent answers. He kept insisting that the last clear memory he had was of standing on a rocky outcrop to the east, looking down at something moving across the frozen lagoon. "What was moving?" Rebecca asked. "I do not know," Mark said. "It was large. It was moving in an impossible way. I was trying to get a better view when everything went dark." That night, Mark checked himself out of the medical facility, despite the physician there recommending observation. He went to his home, locked the doors, and would not respond to Heather's attempts to contact him for the rest of the evening. No one saw Mark Thompson again. The next morning, I was assigned to check on him. I drove to his house on the edge of town, a modest structure that he had built himself 15 years ago. The door was unlocked. I called out as I entered, following protocol, announcing my presence. The house was empty. His truck was gone. His personal equipment was packed. Every trace that he might have left behind was methodically cleared. The only thing remaining was a note on the table, written in Mark's distinctive handwriting. "I cannot stay. I know what I saw. I know what is looking for us. I am leaving Barrow. I am going south. I am not coming back. If you want to survive this, you need to leave too." That was all it said. Rebecca took the note as evidence, but she already knew what everyone was beginning to suspect. Mark Thompson had not left of his own volition. He had been taken. Whatever had happened to Andrew Clark had happened to Mark, and whatever was causing it was smart enough to let him go, smart enough to send him away as a warning. I did not sleep that night either. I sat in my house and cleaned my service weapon and checked the locks on my doors and windows. I listened to the wind. I did not hear breathing this time. I heard something worse. I heard something walking around the house. Not continuously, just occasionally. A footstep. Silence for a long time. Then another footstep. Each one circling the building, patient, deliberate, as if whatever was out there was learning the perimeter, as if it was planning. We lost Stephen Harris on the 4th day of the expanded search. He went out at dawn to continue the northern grid and never came back. His radio stopped responding at 9:47 a.m. His last transmission was a single word: contact. We found his vehicle at the edge of the search area. His radio was inside, still transmitting static. His equipment was neatly arranged on the seat. His service weapon was in its holster, still fully loaded. Stephen Harris was simply gone. That was when Rebecca Ramirez decided to bring in the state police helicopter and expand the search to include every outlying area around Barrow. That was when Heather Perez called the state attorney's office and officially classified Andrew Clark, Mark Thompson, and Stephen Harris as missing and presumed dead. That was also when I finally told Heather what I had heard at my house. "How long has this been happening?" she asked. Her office was small and cold, the way all the ranger station offices were small and cold. She was sitting behind her desk with her hands folded in front of her, and there was something in her expression that suggested she had been waiting for me to tell her this. 3 nights, I said. The breathing the first night, and then the footsteps after we found Mark's note. "Why did you not report it immediately?" "Because it did not make sense," I said. "Because I knew how it would sound. Because I was not even certain it was real." Heather was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what lives in Barrow?" she asked. I looked at her. I did not understand the question. "Stories," she continued. "Old stories. Stories that the Inupiat people who actually live here have been telling for centuries. They do not have names for everything. Some things are just called the thing at the edge, the thing that waits, the thing that watches." "You are talking about folklore," I said. "I am talking about observations," Heather corrected. "Multiple independent witnesses across centuries describing the same phenomenon, a creature that appears and disappears, that takes people without explanation, that leaves behind evidence that does not correspond to anything that we can identify." "That does not mean that folklore is real," I said. "It does not mean it is not," Heather said. She pulled a filing cabinet drawer open and removed a folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, articles from local Barrow papers dating back to the 1970s, incidents of missing persons, search and rescue teams finding only equipment, reports of strange tracks and unidentifiable remains, and in the margins, in handwriting that I recognized as Mark Thompson's, notes and observations, possible sightings, behavioral patterns, theories. "Mark was investigating this," I said. It was not a question. "Mark had been investigating this for 3 years, Heather said. Ever since Stephen Harris mentioned to him that his grandfather, who was Inupiat, had warned him about the thing, about what hunted in the north. Mark started collecting reports, started looking for patterns. Why did he not tell me?" "Because he was not certain," Heather said. "And because telling people makes it harder to maintain operational focus. It makes people afraid." "We should be afraid," I said. "We have 3 missing persons and no body. We have tracks that are not consistent with known animals. We have an entire team that cannot explain what is happening." "Which is exactly why we need to focus," Heather said. She closed the folder and set it on the desk between us. "Read this. Learn what Mark learned. Figure out what we are dealing with." For the next 2 days, I did nothing but read. Mark's notes were meticulous. He had documented 17 disappearances in the Barrow area over the past 50 years, 17 people who had gone missing under circumstances that defied rational explanation. Some had been found partially, with remains that could not be identified. Some had disappeared without a trace. A few, like Mark, had been returned changed. The dates varied. There was no consistent pattern to when the incidents occurred, but there was a geographical pattern. All of them happened within a 2-mile radius of the coast, along the frozen lagoons and the pack ice. Mark had theorized that whatever was taking people was coming from the sea. He had written extensively about the possibility of a previously unknown species adapted to Arctic conditions, something large enough to leave impressions in the snow that resembled human handprints, something that moved quickly and disappeared into the ice. He had also written about the Inupiat stories, about the creature that they called the thing with the backwards feet, about how it lived beneath the ice and emerged only during certain seasons, about how it fed on people but rarely all of them. Sometimes it would take someone and return them months later, changed in ways that were not immediately visible but that would become apparent as time progressed. Changed how? I asked Heather. Mark did not know, she said. The incidents were too far apart and the follow-up documentation was incomplete. But there are records of people who disappeared and returned starting to have what the old records call incidents of perception disturbance. Meaning what? Meaning they saw things that were not there, heard things, developed severe paranoia. Some of them eventually took their own lives. I did not say anything. I was thinking about Mark's words in the research station, how he had spoken with a voice underneath his voice, how his features had been arranged incorrectly, how he had smiled with a smile that was not his. I was thinking about whether he was even still Mark at all, or if what I had seen was something wearing a Mark-shaped shell, learning how to be Mark the way an actor learns a role. On the evening of the 6th day, Rebecca called a meeting with the full team. Heather, Kimberly, myself, and Rebecca gathered in the main briefing room. Stephanie White was there as well, though she had not been officially allowed to continue as part of the search. She had simply never left. She had stayed at the ranger station and had begun helping with documentation and equipment maintenance. Rebecca looked exhausted. Her uniform was wrinkled. There were dark circles under her eyes. She set a stack of files on the table and looked at each of us in turn. I have been doing this job for 22 years, she said. I have investigated murders, assaults, disappearances, accidents, and crimes of almost every category that a human being can commit against another human being. In all of that time, I have built my investigation on the principle that humans behave in ways that are comprehensible, that if you dig deep enough, if you look at the evidence carefully enough, you can determine what happened and why. She paused. I do not think that principle applies here, she continued. I have 3 missing persons. I have 1 missing ranger from the State Service. I have evidence that does not correspond to any known animal. I have geographical inconsistencies and temporal gaps that make no logical sense. And I have a note from a missing person that suggests he understood something that he did not believe was real, and that he fled from it. She looked directly at me. You have read Mark's files? Yes, I said. And you believe that what is taking people is not human? I chose my words carefully. I believe that the evidence suggests a non-human explanation, I said. Then you also believe in folklore, Rebecca said. You believe in creatures that do not exist according to our current understanding of zoology and animal behavior. I believe in the evidence, I said. Rebecca stood up and walked to the map of Barrow that was pinned to the wall. She pointed to a series of red marks that represented the locations where disappearances had occurred. All of them within this radius, she said. All of them at night or during the low-light hours. All of them in areas with direct access to the coast. She turned back to face us. I am recommending that we restrict access to the northern coastal areas until the investigation is concluded. I am further recommending that all search and rescue operations in these areas be conducted during daylight hours with a minimum team size of 4, and with constant radio contact maintained with a base station. That will effectively shut down search operations until the spring, Heather said. Yes, Rebecca acknowledged. It will. Because I do not believe that continuing to send people into those areas is going to result in their safe return. I believe that it is going to result in additional disappearances. No one argued with her. That night, I received a call at my house, unknown number. When I answered, there was only silence on the other end. But underneath the silence, there was breathing. And underneath the breathing, there was a voice. It was not in any language that I recognized. It was not even sounds that a human throat could produce. It was something that existed below the threshold of normal hearing, something that my ear translated into meaning even though my conscious mind could not process it as language. But I understood. The voice was telling me that it was hungry. It was telling me that it had fed on 3 and would feed on more. It was telling me that it was patient and that winter was coming and that during winter there were no help, no rescue, no escape. It was telling me that it was looking forward to meeting me face to face. I hung up the phone. I did not answer when it rang again, but I could hear it ringing from inside the walls, from inside the electrical wiring, from inside my own head. I packed a bag and drove to the ranger station where Heather was working late. I am leaving, I told her. I am submitting my resignation effective immediately, and I am driving south this morning. Heather did not try to stop me. Where will you go? She asked. Away from here, I said. Away from the ice. Away from the thing that is looking for us. Mark thought he could run too, Heather said quietly. Mark thought distance would matter. She did not need to say what I already knew. That Mark had come back. That Mark had been returned after disappearing for 3 days. That whatever had taken him had let him go only after it was finished with him. I did not sleep that night. I loaded my vehicle and waited for dawn. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I pulled out of the ranger station parking lot and headed south toward the highway that would take me out of Barrow. I made it to the edge of town before I realized that I was not alone. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing on the ice. It was taller than any human. Its posture was wrong. Its movement suggested that it was not walking but flowing across the frozen surface like water. I increased my speed. The figure increased its speed to match. I did not look back again until I reached the highway proper. When I finally did, the figure was gone. There was nothing on the ice except the frozen landscape and the wind and the terrible emptiness of the north. I did not feel relieved. I felt pursued. I made it 117 miles south of Barrow before I had to stop for fuel. The town was small. One of the remote settlements that dot the northern Arctic coast. Population 2,000, maybe less. The gas station was the only store, combined with a small diner and a convenience section selling basics. I filled my tank and went inside to buy coffee and food for the road. The cashier was a woman in her 50s with dark eyes and weathered skin. She looked at my ranger uniform and I saw something shift in her expression. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "South," I said. "As far south as I can drive." She rang up my purchases without speaking. When she handed me the bag, she leaned close. "Do not stop once you leave," she said. "Drive straight through, no matter how tired you get. Do not stop for anything." "Why?" I asked. "Because they are already out there," she said. "Looking for you. I can see it in your face. You have encountered it." "How would you know?" I asked. "Because I have seen that face before," she said. "On a man who came through here 3 years ago. State ranger. He stayed one night in the motel next door. The next morning he was gone. We found his vehicle parked on the coast road, empty except for his radio." She did not need to tell me which ranger. I already knew. I left the store and drove. I drove through the afternoon and into the evening. The landscape became less harsh as I moved south, transitioning from pure ice and tundra into areas where vegetation existed. I drove with my windows up and my doors locked, checking my mirrors constantly. I did not see anything following me, but that did not mean it was not there. I did not see the figure on the road until I had already driven past it. It was standing on the shoulder, backlit by my headlights, and for a moment I thought it was a human hitchhiker. Then I saw the proportions. The way the arms were too long, the way the head was positioned, the way it turned to watch my vehicle pass. I did not slow down. I accelerated. In my mirror, I watched it begin to run. Nothing should be able to move that fast. Nothing should be able to keep pace with a vehicle traveling at 60 miles per hour. But it was there, gaining ground, running with a gait that resembled nothing in nature, its limbs pumping in a way that suggested extra joints, extra flexibility, extra everything. I increased my speed to 70, 80, 90. I was on a stretch of road that cut through relatively flat terrain, but there were curves ahead. I could see them in my headlights, appearing and disappearing as the road twisted through the landscape. The figure was still behind me. I began to pray. I am not a religious person, not particularly, but I found myself reciting phrases from a childhood I had not thought about in years. "Our Father who art in heaven, Hail Mary full of grace." All the words that were supposed to keep bad things away. The figure was still behind me. I did not see the moose standing on the road until it was too late. The collision was unavoidable. I hit the animal at 90 miles per hour, and the impact threw my vehicle into a spin. I felt the tires losing grip on the pavement, felt the moment of weightlessness before everything went sideways, felt the impact as the vehicle rolled and came to rest against the guardrail on the opposite side of the road. For a moment, there was only silence, then pain. I was hanging upside down from the seatbelt, blood running into my eyes, my left arm and several ribs screaming. The vehicle had rolled twice, maybe 3 times. The windows were shattered. The interior was chaos. I heard breathing, not my own breathing, something else. Something large and wet, drawing air in and out with deliberate purpose. I did not need to turn my head to know what was standing outside the broken window. "Hello," it said. The voice was almost human this time, almost intelligible. like it had been practicing, learning to shape human sounds from a throat designed for something very different. I tried to move, and felt something shift in my chest that made me gasp. "You are injured," it said. "You cannot run anymore. You cannot hide anymore. The ice has already been inside you since the first night. When you heard me breathing, you breathed me in. I have been part of you this entire time." "No," I said. "Yes," it replied. "And that is how I will take you. Not with teeth or claws, but from the inside. It has been patient, it has been growing, and soon you will feel it beginning to move." I heard the sound of something striking the vehicle. The metal crumpled. I heard it again, and again. The window frame began to tear. I did not think. I reached for the ignition, got the engine to turn over somehow despite the damage, and slammed the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward against the guardrail, breaking through, and suddenly I was falling. I do not remember the impact with the ground below. I remember only the sensation of falling and the terrible certainty that this was where it would end. When I woke, I was in a hospital. The hospital was in Fairbanks, 300 miles south of where the accident occurred. The doctors told me that a truck driver had found me the morning after the crash. They told me that I had broken 2 ribs, fractured my left arm in 2 places, and sustained a severe concussion. They told me that I was extraordinarily lucky to be alive. I was not thinking about luck. I was thinking about what I had heard just before the vehicle went over the guardrail. "The ice has already been inside you." I lay in the hospital bed and felt for it. For whatever was growing inside me. For the thing that the creature had claimed to have infected me with. I did not feel anything, but that did not mean it was not there. Rebecca Ramirez visited me on the second day. She came with coffee and an official statement that I was on medical leave, effective immediately, with full benefits until I was cleared to return to duty. "You do not need to come back," she said. "I have already submitted the paperwork for your resignation. It will be processed by the end of the month." "What happened?" I asked. "After I left?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Stephanie White disappeared 2 days after you left Barrow," she said. "She went to the ranger station to help with documentation and never came back. We found her equipment at the coastal research site. No body, no traces. Just her gear arranged neatly on the snow, exactly the way everything else has been arranged." I felt something move inside my chest. It might have been pain from my broken ribs. It might have been something else. "What about Heather?" I asked. "Still in Barrow, still working, still investigating, though the investigation has effectively stalled. I submitted my report to the state attorney, recommending that the coastal areas remain restricted until the disappearances cease. But without bodies or concrete evidence of foul play, there is very little that can be done." She set a file on the bed beside me. "This is Mark's research," she said. "Everything he collected. I think you should have it. I think you should understand what we are dealing with." "I understand," I said. "I have understood since I left. I just did not want to accept it." "And do you accept it now?" Rebecca asked. I did not answer. I could feel something moving inside me, slowly, like it was swimming through my lungs. Like it was learning the shape of my internal organs. Rebecca left shortly after. Before she went, she gave me her personal cell phone number. "Call me if anything changes," she said. "Call me if you remember anything about the crash. Call me if you start to see things that are not there." "Why would I start to see things?" I asked. "Because Mark did," Rebecca said. "Because according to his notes, that is one of the symptoms of infection. The creature does not kill people directly. It infects them, and then it waits for them to fail." After she left, I lay in the hospital bed and waited. I waited through the night and into the next day. I waited for pain that never quite came. I waited for the thing to announce itself. It did not. But I began to notice other things. The room seemed to shift when I was not looking directly at it. The walls appeared to be farther away sometimes and closer other times. I could hear sounds from the hallway that no one else seemed to hear. Breathing, footsteps, a voice calling my name in a way that was almost familiar. On the third night, I got out of bed and looked in the mirror. For a moment, I did not recognize the face looking back at me. The features were the same, but they were arranged just slightly differently than I remembered. The angle of the chin was off. The spacing of the eyes had changed. The mouth was positioned at a degree that my face should not allow. Then I blinked, and everything snapped back into place. I staggered back to the bed and lay down. In the morning, the doctors wanted to perform additional scans. They were concerned about the concussion. They wanted to make sure there was no internal bleeding or swelling. I agreed to the scans without resistance. Part of me hoped they would find something. Part of me hoped they would find the thing inside me and be able to remove it. The scans showed nothing. "Your brain looks fine," the physician told me. "No internal bleeding, no swelling. The injury was not as severe as we initially thought, but I knew better. The scans could not see what I carried. The equipment was not designed to detect something that existed between the spaces, something that was learning from inside me. I was discharged from the hospital after 5 days with instructions to rest and avoid strenuous activity. I had no vehicle anymore. The wreckage was being examined by the state police. I had no job. My resignation was being processed. I had no purpose except to exist and to slowly, gradually feel something growing inside me. I took a job at a hotel in Fairbanks. It was the kind of job that required minimal interaction, minimal thought. I worked the night shift, checking in guests, processing paperwork, maintaining the building. I lived in a small room in the hotel basement. I did not leave the building. The other staff members thought I was depressed. They were not wrong. It was 3 weeks after the accident when I began to notice the changes becoming obvious. I was standing in the front office late at night, and a guest came down asking for directions. I opened my mouth to answer, and the words came out in a voice that was not quite mine. It had depth underneath it. It had a vibration that seemed to exist below human hearing. The guest looked at me strangely and did not ask me to repeat myself. I could feel it moving more freely now. It was not separate from me anymore. It was becoming integrated into me. My movements became slightly wrong. My balance shifted. The way I walked changed by degrees that I could feel but that other people probably did not notice. I called Rebecca. "It is happening," I said. "The infection, the changes. I am becoming something else." Rebecca listened to me describe the symptoms without interrupting. "You need to come back to Barrow," she said finally. "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Because Mark came back too," she said. "Because what you are feeling is not the end, it is the beginning, and you need to be there when you understand what you are becoming." I did not want to go back. Every part of my rational mind screamed against it, but I could feel the infection growing stronger, and I could feel the pull back toward the north. It was not pulling me with cruelty, it was pulling me with inevitability, the way gravity pulls water toward the ocean. I gave 2 weeks' notice at the hotel. I told them I was relocating. I packed my belongings into a bag, and I drove back north. The landscape changed as I drove north. The vegetation began to diminish, the sky took on new colors. The temperature dropped with each passing mile, and I found myself driving with the windows down despite the cold, welcoming the frigid air into the vehicle. I was not fully myself anymore. The infection had reached a point where the boundaries between myself and the thing inside me had become blurred. I could think my own thoughts, but underneath them I could feel other thoughts. I could move my own body, but I could sense other movements happening in parallel. Coordinated, synchronized. I reached Barrow just as the sun was beginning its final descent toward the horizon for several months. The polar night was approaching. In a few days, the sun would not rise again until the spring. I drove directly to the ranger station. Heather was there. She was not surprised to see me. She seemed to have been expecting me. "You came back," she said. "I do not think I had a choice," I replied. "Mark said the same thing," Heather said. She took me into the briefing room, and she showed me what she had been doing for the past 3 months. She had been collecting data, locations, times, victim profiles. She had mapped out the pattern of disappearances, and she had realized something that Mark's earlier research had missed. The disappearances were not random, they were increasing, and they were moving south. "It is not hunting haphazardly," Heather said. "It is methodical. It is taking specific people and installing something inside them, and then it is sending them away, out into the world." "Why?" I asked. "Expansion," Heather said. "Reproduction, infection. I think it wants to spread itself, but it cannot do it directly. It has to use vectors, people who carry it, who are infected, who slowly, gradually become something other than human." She pulled up her laptop and showed me files. Video footage from security cameras around town. In each one I could see figures that were almost human, moving in ways that were subtly wrong. Some of them were people I recognized. Some were tourists. Some were locals. "How many?" I asked. 17 that I have identified with certainty," Heather said. "Probably more that I have missed. Mark was one of them. Stephen Harris was returned and released into the world. Andrew Clark was taken in the early stages before the infection was complete, but others were allowed to leave." "Where is Mark?" I asked. "He is out there," Heather said, gesturing toward the ice. "Under the ice, where they all go eventually, where the main infection lives. The thing that takes people is not the true organism. It is a vector, an agent. The real thing lives beneath the ice, in the deep water, in places where the pressure and the cold create conditions that nothing human could survive." I felt the infection moving inside me. It was responding to Heather's words. It was becoming activated, energized. "It wants me to go out there," I said. "Yes," Heather said. "It is almost complete with you. Soon you will not be able to resist. Soon it will be stronger than your will to remain human." "How long do I have?" I asked. "Days," Heather said. "Maybe less. The infection works faster once you return to the source." I left the ranger station and walked toward the ice. The sun was a thin line on the horizon, a smear of orange and red across the darkness. The ice stretched away toward the darkness, and somewhere out there, beneath the surface, something was waiting for me. It was welcoming me home. It was calling me by a name that I no longer remembered. I could feel my body beginning to change. My joints were becoming more flexible. My hearing was expanding into frequencies that human ears should not be able to detect. My vision was shifting, adapting to the darkness, seeing colors and shapes that had not existed a moment before. I was becoming something other than human, and the strangest part was that I no longer felt afraid. I no longer felt loss. I felt only anticipation. The ice crunched beneath my feet as I walked out onto the frozen ocean. The darkness was deep and absolute, but I could see clearly. I could see the pressure ridges and the smooth places where the ice was thinnest. I could see the shapes moving beneath the surface, the vast forms that existed in the water below. I could hear their song. It was not music, it was language. Complex, multi-layered, existing in frequencies and patterns that no human brain could normally process. But I could process it, I could understand it. It was welcoming me. It was asking me who I was, and I was trying to answer, but I could not remember my name anymore. I could only remember that I was becoming. I stopped walking when the ice began to crack beneath me. The fracture was spreading in a web pattern, and beneath the cracks I could see water. Water that was not frozen. Water that was impossibly warm. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer human hands. The fingers were too long. The joints bent in too many places. The skin had taken on a texture that was almost scaled, almost translucent, and beneath it I could see something moving. Blood vessels, muscles, structures that had not existed in a human body. This is the infection, I understood. This is the completion. I lay down on the ice and let it crack beneath me. I felt the water embrace me. It was warm and it smelled like home, and it was calling me by the name that I remembered now. Not Anthony anymore, something else, something that had always been waiting under the ice. I sank beneath the surface, and the darkness swallowed me whole. And in that final moment of surrender, I finally understood what I had been from the beginning. Not a human infected by something alien, but something alien that had been learning how to be human, and now the learning was complete. When you are responsible for protecting a remote Arctic settlement, you learn to read silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that means something very large is holding its breath. Last month, 8 people went into the Kotzebue wilderness, 4 came back. What they told me broke every rule I have followed in 23 years of rangering. But what I did not tell the authorities, that is why I am writing this down. My name is Richard Hernandez. I have been a park and forest ranger for the Kotzebue region of Alaska for just over 2 decades. During that time, I have seen bears, moose, wolverines, and the kinds of cold that make your blood slow down. I have never, in all those years, experienced anything that I could not explain within the framework of wildlife biology and environmental science. Until the summer when Amanda Lopez arrived on the northern route. Amanda was 55 years old, a researcher whose credentials involved something I did not fully understand at the time. She arrived in July with 2 assistants, Christopher Anderson, 44, and Lauren Thomas, 61. They carried equipment I had never seen before. Not tracking tools, not observation devices. Something else. Something that seemed designed to measure absence rather than presence. I met them at the ranger station on a Tuesday. The sky was that particular shade of pale blue that comes during the endless daylight. Amanda did not waste time on pleasantries. "We are looking for something," she said. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. "Everything here is something," I replied. "You will need to be more specific. There have been reports. 4 in the last 18 months. Hikers who went missing for brief periods and returned with memory gaps. Footage from trail cameras that shows movement patterns inconsistent with known fauna. And," she pulled out a satellite image, "thermal anomalies that appear and disappear in a way that suggests deliberate evasion." I looked at the image. It showed heat signatures moving through terrain where no animal should have moved that way. The pattern was too purposeful. Too intelligent. What are you actually looking for? I asked. We will know it when we find it, she said. That should have been my warning. Within a week, they had permits and a team assembled. Daniel Taylor, 50, was a specialist in animal behavior with a focus on apex predators. Rachel Moore, 35, handled the technical equipment. Matthew Jackson, 42, was their logistics coordinator, and Nicole Martin, 58, was their guide, a woman who had lived in Kotzebue her entire life and knew the interior territories better than almost anyone. I was assigned to oversee the expedition. Protocol, safety oversight, standard procedure for any outside research in protected areas. We will be hiking into the interior, Amanda told me on the morning of departure. Following a grid pattern, we expect to be out for 7 days. What is your actual research objective? I pressed. We are studying population dynamics of large herbivores, she said, which was a lie. I knew it then. I know it now. The 8 of us set out on a Wednesday morning. The 5 researchers, Nicole Martin as guide, myself, and Marcus Webb, a younger ranger who had only been with us for 2 seasons. The weather was clear. The temperature was 12 degrees Celsius. The landscape around Kotzebue is not forested in the traditional sense. It is tundra, open, rolling terrain with stunted vegetation, ancient permafrost, and a kind of emptiness that makes you understand how small you truly are. We hiked for 2 days without incident. We reached our first survey point, and Amanda's team set up their equipment. I watched them work. They were not looking for tracks. They were not measuring vegetation or taking samples. They were pointing their instruments upward and outward, sweeping the landscape as if searching for something in the air itself. What exactly are those instruments measuring? I asked Rachel. Electromagnetic signatures, she said without looking up. Anomalies in local field variance. That makes no sense for herbivore research. No, she agreed. It does not. On the 3rd day, Nicole came to my tent in the early morning. She looked frightened in a way that I had never seen before. There is something wrong, she said. I have guided in this territory for 38 years. The animals are wrong. The birds are not calling. The ground feels wrong. Feels how? Like something is watching it from below. I told her she was tired, that the remoteness was affecting her perception. I was the authority. I was the experienced ranger. I did not want to believe that she might be sensing something true. By that evening, all of us felt it. It was not visible. It was not a sound exactly. It was a pressure. A sense of mass moving through the landscape just beyond our ability to detect it properly. Daniel and Rachel confirmed that their instruments were registering fluctuations unlike anything in their databases. We need to continue, Amanda said. She did not look afraid. She looked hungry. That night I heard something moving through the perimeter of our camp. It was not a large animal. It was something larger than any animal I knew. I heard it displace stones. I heard it breathe. When I looked out of my tent, I saw only the pale twilight and the empty tundra. Nothing was there, but the space where nothing was there felt heavy with presence. On the 4th day, we found the first site. It was a ridge approximately 2 kilometers from our camp. Rachel's instruments had led us there. The location itself was unremarkable. Tundra like every other stretch of tundra in the interior. But the ground told a different story. There were impressions in the earth, not footprints. Something larger and less specific. As if something enormous had lain in a particular spot repeatedly, compressing the ground and vegetation in a pattern that suggested the weight of something that should not exist in these territories. The impressions measured nearly 4 meters across. How long? I asked Amanda. The vegetation damage suggests weeks, she said. Perhaps months. Months? Nicole's voice was sharp. It has been here for months? The thermal anomalies in the satellite data extended back 16 months, Amanda confirmed. So yes, at least that long. I felt something shift in the composition of my understanding. There was something in this territory, something large, something that had learned to evade detection or, more unsettling, had learned to hide despite being impossible to fully hide. We need to go back, I said. We are just beginning to get useful data, Amanda replied. That is not the point. We have evidence of an unknown large fauna present in an area where 8 people are hiking. That presents an unacceptable safety risk. All research involves risk, Amanda said. Research does not involve an unknown apex predator in a remote region with limited extraction options. But even as I was saying this, I knew that Amanda would not turn back, and I suspected that she had never intended to turn back. The others, Christopher, Daniel, Rachel, they were looking at the impressions with expressions of professional interest, but there was something else underneath. Relief. as if they had expected to find evidence of something extraordinary and were now having their expectations confirmed. We continued deeper. That afternoon, Matthew spotted a cave. It was small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through the entrance, but it was positioned on a south-facing ridge with good visibility of the surrounding terrain. The kind of location an intelligent creature might choose to maintain awareness of its environment. Amanda wanted to investigate. I refused. That is where I draw the line, I said. We do not enter enclosed spaces where we cannot see what is inside. For the first time, Amanda looked at me with something other than professional interest. She looked at me the way a person looks at an obstacle they will eventually have to remove. The cave is clearly a site of significant interest for our research, she said. The cave is off limits, I replied. Nicole stood beside me. Matthew and Rachel exchanged a look. Daniel was examining the cave entrance with the kind of focus usually reserved for something he was about to do despite being told not to. We made camp a safe distance away. That night, I kept watch with a rifle that I hoped would be ineffective against whatever was in these territories. The hope itself felt like faith, fragile and inadequate. Around midnight, I heard it again. The large thing. It was close, perhaps only 200 meters from our camp. It moved deliberately, not like a predator stalking, like something conducting an inspection, verifying our position, assessing our capabilities. And then, around 3 in the morning, it did something that I could not explain. It called, not with sound, not precisely. It was a compression of the air itself. A frequency that I felt in my chest rather than heard with my ears. The call lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It contained what I can only describe as intention, a question perhaps, or a warning. The entire camp woke. Rachel actually gasped. Daniel was on his feet, weapon drawn. Nicole was pale. Amanda stood at the edge of the camp and looked out toward the direction the sound had originated. She was smiling. It knows we are here, she said. It is responding to our presence. We need to go back now, I said. We will continue tomorrow, Amanda replied. But tomorrow did not come the way I expected it to. On the 5th day, we split the group. I did not authorize this, but I was outvoted through a process that I barely registered happening. Amanda suggested that we would cover more ground if we split our resources. Daniel and Matthew would take Rachel and conduct a survey of the northern ridgeline. Amanda, Christopher, and Nicole would remain at the camp and analyze the data we had collected. I would conduct a perimeter survey and attempt to locate additional sites. This is a terrible idea, I said. This is necessary science, Amanda replied. I left with provisions for a full day. The plan was to return by evening. I marked my path carefully and maintained regular distance checks. I documented everything I observed. I was doing my job, but I was also abandoning my responsibility. I was perhaps 3 kilometers from camp when I first realized I was not alone. Not by sound or sight, but by that same sense of presence that had defined the last 3 days. It was moving parallel to me, maintaining distance, testing, perhaps, or simply observing the observer. I stopped. I stood completely still for nearly 5 minutes. The thing stopped as well. I could not see it. I could not hear it clearly. But the space behind me, about 60 meters distant and slightly to the left, felt heavy with weight and attention. I continued walking. It continued following. The dynamic persisted for the entire day. When I returned to camp as the sun was entering its brief dip toward the horizon, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The camp was too silent. There were no voices, no movement. Amanda, Christopher, Nicole, and Nicole's equipment were all present. Nicole was not. Where is Nicole? I asked. Christopher did not answer. He was staring at Amanda with an expression of shock and something that might have been awe. She went to gather water approximately 3 hours ago, Amanda said. She did not return. You let her go alone? She volunteered. She is familiar with this territory. I did not see the need to show me where. She showed me. The water source was a small stream approximately 200 meters from camp. Nicole's route would have taken her directly through a depression in the terrain. A natural feature, but one that limited visibility, a natural location for something large to conceal itself. I tracked her footprints. They stopped in the depression. The surrounding vegetation was disturbed. There were impressions in the earth, large impressions, and there was blood on a rock face. Very little blood, which was somehow worse than a large amount would have been. We need to activate emergency extraction, I said. Now. But we had satellite phones with limited range. We had communication devices designed for coordinating between team members across short distances. We had no way to call for immediate help from this remote location. The nearest settlement with serious medical facilities was 200 kilometers away. What happened here? I asked Amanda. She had followed me to the depression. She was looking at the impressions with a clinical interest that made my hands clench into fists. I believe it took her, she said. You believe it what? Took her. Collected her. She will be kept alive. It appears to be an intelligence-driven behavior. You knew, I said. You knew what was here when you came. You knew, and you did not warn us. Amanda met my eyes. Behind her gaze was the hunger I had seen earlier, now fully exposed. We have been tracking this creature for 7 years, she said. Reports from various regions across the Northern Territories, sightings that did not match any known fauna, evidence of intelligence, evidence of intention. You cannot understand what we have found, Ranger Hernandez. You do not have the framework, but I can tell you that it is the most significant discovery in human history. Nicole is missing. Nicole volunteered for field work in a remote location where an unknown large predator is present. She understood the risks. I wanted to hit her. I wanted to do something that would make her understand the magnitude of her betrayal, but Nicole was gone, and we were still in the territory of something that had intelligence enough to choose which of us to take. Daniel and Matthew returned just before dark. Rachel was not with them. They came running into camp, both of them breathing heavily, both of them marked with injuries they would not immediately explain. It took her, Matthew said. We were surveying the northern ridge. We were examining a site where we found more of the large impressions. Rachel was taking measurements when he stopped. The trauma was visible in his face. When what? I demanded. When it appeared, Daniel said. His arm was bleeding. The wound looked like puncture marks from something very large. Not from where we were looking, from above, from the ridge itself. It was moving on the slope in a way that was absolutely impossible. Four-legged. But the movement was intelligent, tactical. It moved between Matthew and Rachel, isolating her, and then it simply took her. Lifted her, carried her away. Carried her where? Toward the cave, Matthew said. Toward the small cave we found yesterday. I looked at Amanda. She was not shocked. She was taking notes on a tablet computer. We need to get out of here, I said. All of us. Now. Tonight. We will move by compass bearing directly toward Kotzebue. We will move through the darkness if necessary. We will not stop until we are within communication range of the settlement. Some of us are not leaving, Amanda said. I looked at Christopher. He was pale, but his eyes matched Amanda's. He would not leave either. Then you will stay at your own choice, I said. But the rest of us are going. You cannot leave, Amanda said. It was not a request or a suggestion. It was a statement of absolute fact. It will not allow you to leave. It does not have a choice. It does not have authority over my actions. Ranger Hernandez, Amanda said quietly. How many are we? I counted. Myself, Daniel, Matthew, Amanda, Christopher. Nicole and Rachel were gone. 8 started, she continued. 6 remain. But I have been documenting patterns since we arrived. The creature is not random in its selections. It is choosing individuals with specific characteristics. Rachel was a specialist in technical systems. Nicole was a guide, a person with extensive knowledge of the territory. Both would be valuable to an intelligence attempting to understand human technology and human knowledge of this landscape. You are insane. I am accurate, Amanda replied. And it will continue to choose. It will select among us based on utility. We cannot stop it. We can only document what happens and attempt to understand its motivations. I am leaving, I said. But when I stepped beyond the perimeter of our camp, the world changed. It was not sudden. It was more like the atmosphere itself was exerting pressure. A sense of presence so overwhelming that moving forward felt like walking against an impossible wind. The tundra around me felt occupied, as if every square meter of space was being observed and assessed. I took 3 steps beyond the camp perimeter and stopped. The weight of observation was physical, the sense of something vast considering my existence and finding it insufficient, lacking in value. I walked back into camp. You see, Amanda said, it sets the boundaries. We remain here until it permits us to leave. The next morning, I woke to find that 3 of us remained. Daniel and Matthew had gone during the night. I did not hear them leave. I did not hear anything that would have indicated they were in danger. But when dawn came and I checked their sleeping area, they were simply absent. Only Amanda, Christopher, and I remained. Where are they? Christopher asked. His earlier calm had degraded into something closer to panic. Collected, Amanda said. She was looking at her equipment, which had changed. New readings, new data points. The selection process continues. Daniel had expertise in predator behavior. Matthew was a logistics specialist. Both possessed knowledge that would be useful to an intelligence attempting to maintain secrecy while operating in human territories. What does it want with them? Christopher asked. Everything they know, Amanda said. Intelligence, knowledge, understanding of how humans think and plan and anticipate threats. It is killing them, I said. Probably not, Amanda replied. Death would be a waste of resources. I believe it is interrogating them, extracting information, learning. I sat on a rock outside the tent and tried to process what was happening. We were trapped on the Arctic tundra by an intelligence we could not see, an entity that had taken 4 of our 8 companions, with a researcher who apparently welcomed the situation as an unprecedented scientific opportunity. Why are you still here? I asked Amanda. Why has it not taken you? Because I am useful in a different way, she said. I am documenting what is happening. I am recording data. I am serving as a translator, in a sense, between its existence and your understanding of it. You are collaborating with it. I am facilitating communication, she corrected. You cannot fight an intelligence you do not understand, Ranger Hernandez. You cannot negotiate with a species whose motivations are fundamentally alien to your own experience. The best outcome, the only outcome, is coexistence and mutual learning. Where are Nicole and Rachel and Daniel and Matthew? I asked. Where are they right now? Amanda pointed toward the small cave we had discovered 2 days earlier. The cave is much larger on the interior than the entrance suggests. It extends deep into the ridge. There are networks of tunnels. The creature has habitation there. Nicole and Rachel are likely there. Daniel and Matthew will be brought there. And eventually, Christopher pressed. Eventually it will require additional specimens, Amanda said. As its understanding of human knowledge and behavior increases, it will recognize gaps in its comprehension. It will need to expand its sample. More researchers, more specialists, more data sources. You are describing kidnapping, imprisonment, murder. I am describing necessity, Amanda replied. Evolution. The emergence of a new paradigm in human existence. That is when I understood that I could not trust anyone but myself. Christopher was still in shock, still capable of being reasoned with. But Amanda had crossed a threshold into something beyond collaboration. She was true believing. She had decided that the impossible was not just real but righteous. That night, I made a decision that I still struggle with. I left the camp alone. I did not ask Christopher to join me. I did not tell him what I was planning. I simply walked away and hoped that the creature's attention was elsewhere. And this time, the pressure did not stop me. The weight of observation did not force me backward. I walked for nearly an hour before I realized that the restriction had been selectively applied. It had allowed me to leave because I was not a priority target. I was not a specialist or a researcher or someone whose knowledge would be valuable to an intelligence attempting to understand human capability. I was simply a ranger who had not been useful enough to keep. I walked all night. I navigated by the constellations and by memory of terrain. I tried not to think about the people I was abandoning. By dawn, I had covered approximately 30 kilometers. By the following evening, I had reached the outer settlements of a smaller research station. Within 48 hours, I had been evacuated to Kotzebue. The search and rescue operation that followed was comprehensive but ultimately unsuccessful. When the team returned to our base camp, they found it empty. No bodies, no evidence of struggle, just equipment and supplies arranged as if we had simply ceased to exist. Amanda Lopez and Christopher Anderson were listed as missing persons. No trace of them was ever found. The official investigation concluded that they had become disoriented during a field expedition and likely perished in the Arctic environment. It happens more often than you might think in these territories. The other 4, Nicole Martin, Rachel Moore, Daniel Taylor, and Matthew Jackson, were found 2 weeks later, approximately 15 kilometers from where we had camped, walking in a northern direction. They were all alive. They were all, at first, unable to explain what had happened to them. They described periods of missing time. Spaces in their memory where hours or days had simply not been recorded in their consciousness. When they were examined at the medical facility in Kotzebue, there was no physical evidence of abuse, no wounds, no signs of malnutrition, no indicators of the trauma you would expect from abduction and captivity. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and psychologically damaged but physically intact. When I attempted to interview them about what had happened, they refused to speak, not out of trauma, but out of what appeared to be deliberate refusal. As if discussing what they had experienced would somehow breach a contract they had made during the period of their captivity. The official reports that I filed described equipment failure, disorientation, and a series of tragic choices that led to 2 members of the expedition becoming lost. I did not mention the creature. I did not mention the impressions in the earth or the sound that was not a sound or the overwhelming sense of presence that had trapped us in that small camp. I knew that no one would believe me. More importantly, I knew that telling the truth would guarantee that other expeditions would be sent, other researchers would come, other people would be taken. So I lied. And the lie became the official record. And Nicole and Rachel and Daniel and Matthew were eventually released back into civilian life, functioning but changed. They found jobs in other territories. They built lives that appeared normal, but were, I suspect, fundamentally altered by what they experienced beneath that small cave on the Arctic tundra. That was 11 months ago. I have continued my work as a park ranger in the Kotzebue region. I have been questioned extensively by various state and federal agencies about what happened during the expedition. I have maintained my official story. I have said nothing about the truth, but the truth has not ceased simply because I have been silent about it. The impressions in the tundra continue to appear. Different locations each season, but always in the interior territories where human activity is minimal and detection is difficult. The thermal anomalies continue to register on satellite equipment, always in locations that align with the pattern of impressions, and occasionally hikers report missing equipment, missing time, or strange sounds on the wind that cannot be explained by any fauna known to exist in these latitudes. Last month, a family of 4 went hiking in the interior. They were missing for 6 hours. When they returned to the settlement, they were all crying, but they would not explain why. The father walked into the administration office and submitted an official report stating that they had become disoriented and found their own way back. Nothing more. I know what happened. They were visited, assessed, released, presumably deemed unworthy of extended observation or collection. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter. It was from Amanda Lopez. It arrived at the ranger station with no postage and no origin address. The envelope was addressed only to my name. Inside was a handwritten note. Richard, you were not sufficiently useful to collect, but you were sufficiently skilled to survive. That makes you uniquely valuable as a witness and a record keeper. What you have experienced is the edge of a transformation. Our species is no longer alone. We have never been alone, but we are only now beginning to understand what shares our world. A creature, if you can call it that using only the constraints of human taxonomy, is not hostile, despite what you interpret as hostility. It is curious, it is systematic, it is attempting to understand its relationship to the most developed tool-using species on this planet. That is not evil. That is intelligence engaging with intelligence, albeit from dramatically unequal perspectives. Nicole, Rachel, Daniel, and Matthew are alive. They are well. They have chosen to remain in the interior territories in support of continued research and continued peaceful coexistence between our species. They have become something beyond human but not less than human. You have a choice now. You can continue to maintain your silence, which is what we prefer. You can leave this territory and speak your truth to a world that will never believe you, or you can step beyond the barrier that currently constrains you and accept the offer that will eventually come. Either way, you should know, we are coming. Not as an invasion, as a revelation. The long darkness is ending, Richard. You have seen its edge. Amanda, I have not responded to the letter. I have not attempted to trace its origin. I have maintained my position as ranger of this territory for the past 11 months, and I will continue to maintain it. But I know what she meant. I know what the choice represents. I have felt the presence in the tundra many times since I returned. I know that I am being observed. I know that eventually the decision will be made about whether I remain useful enough to preserve or whether I become something more than a witness. Some nights, particularly when the wind is right and the stars are bright in that endless Arctic twilight, I hear the sound again, that compression of air that is not quite sound, that frequency that I feel more than hear. And some nights, I wonder if I am still truly alone here. If the distance that has been maintained between myself and what is truly present in these territories is a choice by them or an accident of circumstance. The tundra is vast, the Arctic sky is endless, and somewhere in the darkness between the settlements and the interior ridges, something is learning what it means to coexist with a species that cannot yet comprehend its existence. This is my account. This is what I have witnessed. This is what I have chosen to record so that if others come after me, they will have a framework for understanding what they encounter. I am a park ranger in Kotzebue, and I have documented something that should not exist in the framework of your understanding. But existence has never been limited by the constraints of belief, and I am no longer certain that I am the one maintaining surveillance of this territory. I think perhaps the surveillance has been mutual all along. The darkness is ending, and something vast is awakening in the place where the light never truly dies. We found Piper's hunting rifle 3 miles from camp, still loaded. The strange part wasn't that she'd abandoned it. It was that something else had been wearing her face when we found it on the trail. My name is Hunter Freeman, and I'm 15 years old. This is the story of what happened to 9 adults and me during what we thought would be a simple summer hunting trip through the Appalachian wilderness. I need to tell this while I still remember every detail, because I know what happened, and I know what's still out there, and I know nobody will believe any of us. The trip began 5 weeks before school started. My father, Robert Harrison, had organized the expedition for months. He wanted to introduce me to real hunting, not the kind with bows and targets in our backyard, but the real thing, the kind where you spend days in the mountains and come home with stories. We were supposed to hunt game in the remote regions of the highlands, but what we found instead was something that turned the game tables completely around. There were 10 of us total. My father Robert, his best friend Kennedy Gibson, and Jeremiah McDonald, who worked with my father at the mill. The 3 of them had been hunting together since college. Then there were the women, Samantha Cruz, Christian Marshall, and Autumn Ortiz. They weren't hunters, but they wanted the experience. Samantha had always been curious about wilderness survival. Christian loved photography and wanted to document our expedition. Autumn was Samantha's sister and came along for the adventure. The last 2 were my age. Jordan Gomez turned 17 that month and had been training for wilderness expeditions since he was 12. Piper Murray was 16, quiet and sharp-eyed, the kind of girl who could read animal tracks like other people read books. She wasn't part of any of our families, but Kennedy had sponsored her for a scholarship at the Outdoor Survival Institute. This trip was supposed to be her reward. Ruby Wells was 16 like Piper, but she was different in every way. Ruby came because her uncle was Jeremiah. She was nervous about the whole thing, scared of bears and snakes and bugs, but Jeremiah insisted that she needed to face her fears. That decision to bring her along might have saved some of our lives, though I'm still not certain that's true. We set up base camp in a valley called Widow's Gap, deep in the mountains where the trees grew so thick that noon looked like dusk. The camp itself was modest. We had 3 large tents arranged in a triangle, a cooking station, and a perimeter we marked with rope and bell charms, the kind of thing people hang to keep animals away. We didn't know then that the bells would do nothing to stop what was coming. The first 3 days were perfect. We hiked, we scouted, we told stories around the fire. Kennedy and Jeremiah tracked and found evidence of deer throughout the region. Robert showed me how to read the land, how to move quietly through underbrush, how to find where animals drink and eat. Jordan was already an expert. He moved through those woods like he'd been born there. Piper spent hours studying the trails. She kept detailed notes in a leather journal, sketching track patterns and animal behavior. "Something's wrong," she said to me on the 3rd evening while we prepared firewood. "The game doesn't move right here. The deer, the raccoons, everything moves like they're running from something, not towards safety, running from terror." I asked her what she meant. "I don't know," she said, staring up at the mountains. "But look at the trees. See the claw marks on that hemlock? Those are fresh, and they're too high for any animal around here, way too high." I didn't want to believe her. I didn't want to think there was anything in those woods that could frighten animals that badly. But I looked at the marks she pointed to, deep gouges in the bark that spiraled upward, and I felt something shift in my stomach. That night, Christian came to my father with a problem. The photographs she was taking on her expensive camera kept showing corruptions, shapes in the background, objects that weren't there when she pressed the shutter. At first, we thought it was a technical malfunction, but then it happened to all the cameras. Every single one showed the same phenomenon. A tall, thin silhouette, always just barely out of focus, always in the periphery, always watching from between the trees. "It's the compression," my father said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Digital artifacts. We all know cameras lie sometimes," but Kennedy shook his head slowly. "We need to talk about why there's a figure in every single photograph, in the background, in shots taken from different angles at the same moment. How does that happen unless something is actually there, moving faster than physics allows, being in multiple places at once?" I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in my tent listening to the mountain sounds, and I started to understand what Piper meant about terror. There was a quality to the silence in those woods that wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of prey animals hiding, waiting for a predator to pass. On the 4th morning, Samantha woke screaming. She came running out of her tent where she'd been sleeping with Christian and Autumn. her hands pressed to her face. My father ran to her immediately, and she was hyperventilating so badly that Jeremiah had to help her sit down. Her face was covered in scratches, deep, parallel gouges across her left cheek and forehead that had bled freely during the night. "What happened?" Robert demanded, already examining her injuries. "Samantha, what happened?" "There was something," she gasped. "In the tent. It was dark, but I could see it moving. A shape. It had arms, but they were wrong. The hands had too many fingers, and its face, God, its face was right over me. It was wearing a face, wearing it like a mask, and the face under the mask didn't match the face on top. They were moving separately, sliding against each other." Christian and Autumn had been awake too. They'd seen the shape in their tent but had frozen, paralyzed by fear, unable to move. They described the same thing, something large, something that moved in ways that no animal should move, something that appeared to be wearing skin that didn't fit properly. "Mountain lion," Kennedy said, but his voice wavered. "Has to be. Maybe a dark coat made it look strange in the tent." "Mountain lions don't scratch people and then leave," Jeremiah countered. "They attack to kill. This was something else. This was something that was playing with us." Piper said nothing. She just stared at the claw marks on the hemlock tree and then at the scratches on Samantha's face. Then she walked the perimeter of our camp until she found what she was looking for. She called us over and pointed to the ground. "Footprints." But not quite. The front portions of the prints showed human feet. Bare human feet, with toes and nails and all the right proportions. But the back portions, the heels and the arches, showed something else entirely. Paw prints, 4 toes and a claw mark. They switched in the middle, as if the creature wore the front half of a human foot and the back half of an animal. "That's not possible," Robert said flatly. "Nothing like that exists." "We all saw those pictures," Christian said quietly. "On every camera, something was there, and now we know what it looks like. But we didn't know what it looked like. Not really. Not yet." Ruby started crying. Real, terrified sobs that made her uncle hold her while she shook. She wanted to leave. She wanted to go back to the car and drive down the mountain and go home. And looking back now, I understand why. Ruby was young. Ruby was perceptive. Ruby understood that the rules had changed. But my father wouldn't hear it. He said we were letting our imagination run wild. He said there was a rational explanation. He said we were staying until we'd gathered our supplies and hiked out on schedule. He was determined, maybe stubborn, maybe too proud to admit that he'd led us somewhere dangerous. "We're hunters," he told everyone. "We understand risk. We understand wild places. This is just a predator we haven't identified yet. Once we understand what it is, we'll know how to handle it." What he didn't understand was that we were the ones being hunted now. And the predator we were facing didn't operate by the rules of nature. The next day, Piper suggested we make campfires throughout the night. She believed the light would protect us, that whatever was out there might fear fire the way animals feared flames. It sounded reasonable enough. We divided into watches, staying awake in pairs, keeping the fires hot and bright, trying not to look into the darkness beyond the light where we could feel something watching us. Around 2 in the morning on the 5th day, Jordan heard singing. He woke my father and Kennedy immediately. The sound was coming from the forest, about a quarter-mile away, just barely audible over the crackle of the fire. It was a woman's voice, beautiful and haunting, singing in a language none of us recognized. The melody was hypnotic, the kind of song that made you want to follow it, to find the source, to get closer. "Don't listen to it," Piper said sharply, when she came to see what was happening. "Don't let it into your head. That's not a person singing. That's not anything that has a right to use a human voice." Jeremiah wanted to investigate. He said maybe someone had gotten lost from another group, maybe someone needed help. But Piper grabbed his arm hard enough to leave marks. "If you walk toward that voice," she said, "you won't come back looking like Jeremiah McDonald. You'll come back wearing his face, but it won't be you inside anymore." Something in the way she said it made everyone believe her. The singing continued for hours. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't getting closer. It was patient, rhythmic, like a lullaby that never ended. Samantha, despite her injuries, fell asleep to it, and we had to keep rousing her, keeping her awake, making sure she didn't wander off into the dark. By dawn, the singing had stopped. But we found something at the edge of our perimeter, just inside the rope line, a piece of cloth. It was old, weathered, the color of ancient bone, and on it someone had written a message in ash that smudged when touched. "I am lonely in these mountains. I have worn so many faces, so many lives. Would one of you like to stay with me? Would one of you like to let me wear yours?" That's when Autumn decided to leave camp. She told Samantha that she couldn't stay here anymore, that the rational choice was to pack her bag and walk down the mountain road until she reached the ranger station. Samantha begged her not to go, but Autumn was adamant. She said the rest of us could believe in folklore and folk superstition if we wanted to, but she wasn't going to stay in a place where people were deliberately trying to frighten her. "You're being irrational," she told my father. "All of you are. There's a mountain lion or a wild dog and we're all making it into a ghost story. I'm leaving, and when I reach help, I'm bringing back actual authorities, not more terrified campers." We couldn't stop her. She packed her bag, took water and supplies, and headed down the trail toward the road. It was 9 in the morning, broad daylight, safe as safe could be. She never reached the road. We realized she was missing when she didn't return after 6 hours. The trail was only 3 miles to the main access road. Even walking slowly, she should have been there in 90 minutes. My father organized a search party. Himself, Kennedy, and Jeremiah set out to find her, each one carrying a rifle, each one telling us to stay at camp and keep the fires burning. "If she collapsed," Kennedy said, "we'll find her. If she got lost, we'll find her. We'll be back in 2 hours." They weren't back in 2 hours. They weren't back in 3 hours or 4 hours. By the time they returned, dragging through the trees around sunset, they looked like men who had seen something that rewired their understanding of reality. They had found Autumn. She was still alive. She was waiting for them in the middle of the trail, sitting on a log as calm as anyone could be, and for a moment they thought she was fine. But as they got closer, they realized something was wrong with her proportions. Her arms seemed too long, her head tilted at an angle that no human neck could create. When she turned to look at them, her smile was too wide, and her eyes didn't blink at the same time. One eye opened as the other closed, like they operated independently. "Autumn," my father called out. "We're here to help you. What happened? Are you hurt?" The thing wearing Autumn's body laughed. It laughed in Autumn's voice, but the laugh went on too long, became more of a growl that harmonized with itself, as if two throats were producing the sound simultaneously. "Autumn is fine," it said. "Autumn is more than fine. Autumn is finally home. Autumn wanted to stay with me forever, so I let her. I wore her, and she wore me, and we became one, and now she understands. Now she understands what it's like to be hungry for every face you've ever seen." My father raised his rifle, but Kennedy struck it down. "That's not the way to handle this," Kennedy said, though his voice was shaking. "That's not our choice to make. What do we do?" Jeremiah whispered. The Autumn thing stood up smoothly, its limbs moving in a way that seemed to have too many joints. It looked at each of them with those independent eyes, and then it began to walk back toward the forest. "Go back to your camp," it said in its beautiful, wrong voice. "Tell the others that the face-wearer is real. Tell them that I don't mean harm. I'm just so very lonely, and I've been here since before the mountains had names, since before your people came to these hills with their rifles and their righteous certainty. One life at a time, that's all I take. One volunteer who understands that this is the only way to end the hunger." It disappeared into the trees. When my father reached that spot seconds later, there was nothing there. No body, no blood, no sign that anything had been standing there at all. They ran back to camp and told us everything. The fear that had been building became absolute. This wasn't a mountain lion. This wasn't a predator we could hunt or trap. This was something that understood language, something that could reason, something that could wear the faces and bodies of the people we loved and make us question which ones were still alive. The question became immediate. Was Autumn really in there somewhere? Had she chosen to merge with the creature? Or was she dead, and the thing we'd seen was simply wearing her like clothing? Ruby threw up when she heard. She kept saying she wanted to go home, that we should all run, that we should try to reach the ranger station. But my father, despite what he'd witnessed, wouldn't allow it. "We leave, and we're scattered," he said. "We run from here to the road, and we're alone in the dark with that thing. We stay together, we watch each other. We make sure that anyone who leaves this camp is actually who we think they are." So we established tests. We made everyone answer personal questions that only the real person would know. We never let anyone out of sight. We burned the fires so hot that we could barely stay near them, and we waited. On the 8th night, the thing came directly to our camp. It appeared at the edge of the light, wearing a face we'd never seen before. It was male, young, beautiful in a way that drew your eye and made it impossible to look away. It looked like someone you'd known your whole life, someone important, someone you loved, even though you couldn't quite remember who. "I want to negotiate," it said calmly. "One life, given freely, will satisfy me for another year. Choose one person to stay with me, and the rest of you can walk out of these mountains at dawn. You'll never see me again. You'll be safe." "No," my father said. 1 life, the thing continued, unconcerned. That's all I'm asking. Is that not reasonable? Is 1 life too much to ask when you're asking for 9? You're not negotiating, Piper said. You're lying. There's no version of this where we give you someone and you let us go. You'll take the person we offer and then you'll want another and then another until we're all gone. The thing smiled. Perhaps you're right, or perhaps I'll keep my word because I value truth more than you'd expect. Perhaps I respect the compact more than your people ever have. But you'll never know unless you try, will you? Jordan stepped forward. He was young and brave and stupid in the way that 15-year-olds and 17-year-olds can be. Take me, he said. Let the others go. I'll give you my face. No, Kennedy said, and the word came out like a gunshot. I have a better idea, Piper said. She walked to the edge of the firelight and looked directly at the creature. What if I make you a deal? What if I let you have me, but only if you promise to leave these mountains, to go somewhere else, to never return to this valley, to never hunt here again? Piper, my father breathed. What are you doing? Something has to end this, Piper said. And the only currency it understands is faces, life for life. But a life that chooses to go freely is worth more than one taken by force. Isn't that right? The thing wearing the beautiful face tilted its head. You understand better than the others, yes. A life given freely burns longer, sustains longer, means more. But I have worn so many faces that were not willing. Would you really leave these mountains defenseless just to save the lives you came with? I don't care about the mountains, Piper said. I care about my friends. I care about this girl named Ruby who was terrified from day one but came anyway because her uncle asked her. I care about that boy Jordan who offers himself first because he's the kind of person who can't stand to see suffering. I care about Robert, who's stubborn and proud but who'd throw himself off a cliff if it saved his son. 1 life, my life, against 9. That's a fair trade. Before anyone could stop her, Piper walked forward, into the darkness past the firelight, toward the thing that was waiting for her. What happened next, I can only tell you what I saw from the camp. The creature's form expanded, becoming enormous, becoming a shape that was neither animal nor human, becoming something that could only be described as wrong. It was all teeth and claws and eyes and arms, and it was beautiful and horrible. And there was a moment where Piper seemed to step into it willingly, and then the darkness closed around them both, and they were gone. When she was taken, when she vanished into that impossible form, something changed. The hunger that had been radiating from that creature, the aggressive presence that had been pressing on our camp, seemed to release. It withdrew. The air itself became lighter, and in the morning we walked down the mountain trail, all 8 of us. My father and Kennedy and Jeremiah, Samantha, Christian and Ruby, Jordan and myself. We walked in sunlight toward the ranger station, toward help, toward civilization where people would explain everything away as altitude sickness and group hysteria and the stress of the wilderness. The ranger we met, a man named Dalton Price, tried to help. We told him some of what had happened. We told him about Autumn and about how Piper had disappeared into the forest. He organized a search. He brought in more people, more equipment, more authority. They found Autumn 3 days later, walking out of the mountains on her own. She was unharmed, wearing her own face, acting completely normal. She claimed she'd gotten lost and had been trying to find her way back the whole time. She remembered nothing of the thing that had worn her skin. She insisted that the rest of us were confused, that we'd all been frightened by the wilderness and made up a shared delusion. The search for Piper turned up nothing. No body, no clothing, no blood. No trace that she'd ever existed past the point where she stepped into the darkness. My father tried to tell the official story, but he could see the skepticism in the rancher's eyes, the understanding that he was either lying or crazy. Eventually, we stopped trying. We let them file it as a disappearance, one more mystery of the mountains. But I remember the creature's words. I remember its question. Would we ever know if it had kept its promise? Would we ever be able to tell if Piper was dead, or if she was still out there somewhere, merged with that ancient thing, wearing its faces as it wore countless others? That was 2 months ago. I'm telling this story now because my father asked me to. He said the truth needed to exist somewhere, even if nobody believed it, even if everyone we told thought we were broken by what we'd experienced. I don't go into the woods anymore, but sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear singing. Beautiful singing in a language I don't understand, and I wonder if it's Piper, finally happy in a way she never could be in this world, or if it's the creature, calling, waiting, hoping that one of us will be weak enough to come back. I suspect we all know which answer is true, and I suspect none of us will ever speak of these mountains again. You're about to witness the true account of James Anderson, a skilled outdoorsman who went into Michigan's remote forests seeking peace and found something that changed him forever. You'll hear about the smell, that putrid chemical stench that signals something is wrong. You'll follow James as the sounds of something massive close in around him. You'll feel his terror when he finally sees the creature. Not a bear, not anything natural. Something impossibly tall, impossibly wrong. You'll experience the moment he fires his revolver twice and watches the bullets have absolutely no effect. You'll run with him through the forest as this thing hunts him with movements that defy nature itself. You'll suffer through his crawl through the darkness with shattered legs, dragging himself toward safety, toward hope, and you'll discover the most chilling truth of all, why it left him alive. This is a story about a man who lost his sanctuary, about the wilderness revealing something we were never meant to see, about a creature that exists in the gap between the known and the impossible. So hit that subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think awaits in those Michigan forests. Then sit back, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself for what comes next. My father taught me to hunt when I was 12 years old. The woods outside Traverse City became my classroom and Dad, my silent instructor. He wasn't much for talking, my father, but in the stillness of a Michigan dawn, waiting for deer to emerge from morning mist, he taught me everything important without saying much at all. Patience, observation, respect for the wilderness and what lived in it. By 16, I could track deer through mixed hardwood forest. I'd field dress a buck with practiced efficiency and move through bushes making less noise than the squirrels overhead. While other kids played video games or hung out at the mall, I was studying animal prints in creek mud or practicing my marksmanship at the county range. The other boys thought I was strange. I didn't care. Nothing compared to that feeling of being alone in the forest, completely self-reliant, connected to something old and real. College took me to the University of Michigan, where I studied mechanical engineering because it seemed practical. My weekends belonged to whatever patches of nature I could find within driving distance. Those 4 years felt like marking time, a necessary step toward independence. But the classroom never compared to what my father had taught me with his calloused hands and knowing silences. After graduation, I took a position at Midwest Engineering Associates in Lansing, Michigan. The job promised advancement and good pay, but what really sold me was the proximity to the Upper Peninsula wilderness. I could build a career and still have forests at my doorstep. That was 8 years ago. The engineering work suited me. I had an eye for detail and a talent for spotting potential problems in designs before they became expensive mistakes. My colleagues respected my thoroughness and clients appreciated my directness. I climbed steadily through the ranks, eventually heading the commercial development division. With success came longer hours, constant client calls, and deadlines that kept me at the office until midnight more often than I wanted to admit. I met Elena through work. She came in as an interior designer on a hotel renovation project, and I noticed her immediately. Not just her striking amber eyes or the confident way she presented her concepts, but how meticulously she approached every aspect of her designs. We were married within 18 months, buying a house in a quiet Lansing suburb with good schools nearby, though we hadn't discussed children yet. Elena didn't share my passion for the outdoors. She'd grown up in Detroit, where nature was something you visited in carefully maintained parks, not something you immersed yourself in. Early in our relationship, she tried joining me on a few hikes, but her discomfort was obvious from the constant checking for ticks to her tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I just don't get what you see out there," she told me after a particularly mosquito-filled excursion. "We have this beautiful home with all the comforts anyone could want. Why spend your weekend getting dirty and exhausted?" I tried explaining it once, that feeling of connection, of being part of something bigger than myself, but the words came out clumsy and inadequate. So we reached an unspoken agreement. My outdoor trips became solo adventures, while our shared time centered around home improvements, dinner with friends, and occasional city weekends. It worked for us, mostly, but something essential in me started to wither without regular time in the woods, so I made it a priority. One weekend each month, sometimes 2 during winter when work slowed, I'd take a day trip to hike, fish, or simply sit in silence among trees. Elena never complained, though I sometimes caught a flicker of concern when I checked my revolver before leaving. "You really think you need that?" she asked the first time she saw me pack it. "Probably not," I admitted, sliding the .38 into its holster. "But spend enough time in remote areas, you learn to prepare for anything." The last week of November had been brutal at work. We'd lost a major contract due to a miscalculation in the bid. Not my department's error, but I'd spent days in damage control meetings. The office politics turned toxic, with departments pointing fingers and executives demanding explanations. By Friday evening, I felt hollowed out, my thoughts scattered and jumpy. I needed trees and silence more than I had in months. That night, after a quiet dinner with Elena, I retreated to my home office and started browsing hiking forums. The usual trails near Lansing wouldn't cut it. I needed something new, somewhere I could truly lose myself for a few hours. On a site dedicated to Upper Peninsula hiking, I found a thread about a secluded section of the North Country Trail in Ottawa National Forest, about 2 hours northeast of Lansing. Hardly ever see another soul out there, especially this time of year, one user wrote. 7-mile loop with some nice views from the ridge lines. Not technically challenging, but remote enough to feel like you've left civilization behind. I studied the trail photos, noting the white diamond blazes marking the path through dense oak and hickory forest. The terrain looked perfect, challenging enough to demand attention, but not so difficult that I'd spend the entire hike watching my footing. Several commenters mentioned wildlife sightings, deer, wild turkey, even the occasional black bear, though those were rare in Michigan. I mapped the drive, just over 2 hours from our house to the trailhead. If I left early enough, I could be on the trail by sunrise, complete the loop by early afternoon, and be home for dinner. Elena had plans to meet friends for lunch anyway. Perfect timing. That night, I packed with my usual precision, laying everything out on the bed in our spare room. My day pack contained 3 liters of water, protein bars, beef jerky, a small first aid kit, a compass, and a physical map of the trail area in addition to the GPS on my phone. I added a headlamp, extra batteries, and a lightweight emergency blanket, another habit from Dad, who insisted on preparing for unexpected overnight stays even on day hikes. My hunting knife went into its leather sheath on my belt. Last came my .38 Smith & Wesson revolver. I checked it carefully, loaded 5 rounds, and secured it in my hip holster. Michigan's concealed carry laws made this legal, and in remote areas the gun provided peace of mind against both 4-legged and 2-legged threats. I laid out my clothes: moisture-wicking base layer, flannel shirt, insulated vest, and waterproof jacket. Thick hiking socks and broken-in boots completed the outfit. The weather forecast predicted temperatures in the low 40s, cold enough to keep casual hikers away, perfect for someone seeking solitude. Elena came in while I was packing and leaned against the doorframe, watching me with a small smile. "Got everything you need to survive the apocalypse?" she asked. "Just the essentials," I replied, returning her smile. "I'm not going far, just a new trail I found online. Should be back for dinner." She nodded, then crossed the room and kissed me lightly. "Be careful out there, okay?" she said. "Cell reception can be spotty in those hills." "Always am," I promised. "I'll text when I'm headed back." That night I slept poorly, partly from anticipation and partly from lingering stress from work. By 4:30 a.m., I gave up trying, quietly showered and dressed in the dark. Downstairs I made a thermos of coffee and grabbed a banana for the drive. Before leaving, I paused in our bedroom doorway watching Elena sleep. The soft rhythm of her breathing, the way her dark hair spread across the pillow, these moments always stirred something protective in me. I moved to her side and gently kissed her forehead. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. "I love you," I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me. The cold hit me hard when I stepped outside, making my lungs sting. I loaded my gear into my Ford F-150 and started the engine, letting it warm up while I scraped frost off the windshield. The neighborhood was quiet, with just a few porch lights on. As I backed out of the driveway, I felt better already. I always do when I head out alone. The roads were empty as I drove through Lansing and got onto Highway 2 going northeast. My headlights lit up the road ahead and I sipped coffee while listening to classic rock playing softly. After 2 hours of driving through more and more country roads, I reached the turnoff for the forest access road. I followed it for 3 miles, my truck handling the bumpy dirt path no problem. The sky was getting lighter, turning from black to dark blue, but the trees were still pretty dark. The trailhead parking area was basically just a wide spot in the road with room for maybe 6 vehicles. Mine was the only one there, exactly what I wanted. I turned off the engine and sat for a minute, listening to the engine cooling down and the first bird starting to chirp. I checked my watch. 6:45 a.m., perfect time to start hiking as daylight filled the forest. I put on my day pack, adjusted my belt so I could easily reach both my knife and revolver, and locked the truck. The air smelled like pine and damp dirt, fresh and crisp at the trailhead. An old wooden sign showed a simple map of the loop and some rules. I took a picture of it with my phone as backup to my paper map. The white diamond trail markers stood out on the tree trunks. With one last look at my truck, I stepped onto the trail and into the trees, not knowing that this normal morning hike would change everything. All the stuff before today would soon feel like someone else's life. Back then, I thought I knew what the wilderness was all about. I stepped from my truck into the morning chill, breathing in the clean Upper Peninsula air. The temperature couldn't have been more than 35 degrees, but that suited me fine. The frosty leaves crunched under my boots as I got my gear ready, adjusted my day pack, and locked the vehicle. The forest was pretty quiet. Sunlight had just started coming through the trees, making bright spots on the ground. I checked my watch. 6:52 a.m. perfect timing. The trailhead was about 20 feet ahead, marked by a simple wooden sign with a carved map of the 7-mile loop. I took a moment to relax, feeling the stress start to fade away. All the work stuff, spreadsheets, client calls, office drama, didn't matter out here. This was why I came, to feel like myself again instead of some guy in work clothes sitting through meetings. The white diamond trail markers were easy to spot in the early light against the dark tree bark. I followed them into the forest. My footsteps the only sound besides a few birds chirping. Hiking in November meant empty trails, no crowds with their speakers blasting music, no big family groups, just me in the woods. That made me smile. This is exactly what I needed, I said to no one, my voice seeming small under the vast dome of trees. The trail went through patches of oak and hickory trees. Most of their leaves had already fallen, letting me see bits of sky that would be hidden in summer. I kept a steady pace, not too fast or slow. My breathing matched my steps as I walked. About a mile in, the path went uphill toward a ridge. It wasn't super steep, but enough to make me warm up and unzip my jacket halfway. At the top, I could see through the trees to the view, hills stretching out all brown and deep red from fall. I stopped for a minute to look. 2 hawks flew circles overhead, barely flapping their wings. I watched until they disappeared behind a far-off hill. Back on the trail, I looked down at the ground, checking out the tracks in the mud and leaves. Fresh deer prints crossed the path, looked like a mom and baby based on their size. Turkeys had scratched around in spots where they'd been looking for acorns. I noticed all this stuff without really thinking about it. My dad taught me that animal signs aren't just interesting, they actually tell you how a forest works. You learn where animals find water, food, and which places might have predators. The trail went down into a small valley with a creek running through it. The water flowed over smooth rocks, making a nice sound. I checked my watch. I'd been hiking for just over an hour. Good time for a break. I took off my pack and sat on a fallen log by the creek. I opened my water bottle, took a few long drinks, then filled it up from my reservoir. The hike and cold air had made me thirstier than I thought. That's when it hit me. A smell so bad it made me pull back. It was disgusting, like sewage and rot mixed with something else I couldn't place. It wasn't just the normal smell of a dead animal or natural decay. This was too strong, almost fake smelling. I covered my nose with my sleeve. What the hell? I stood up and looked around. I figured it might be a dead deer, maybe one that got shot by a hunter and came here to die. But the smell didn't seem right for that. It was too strong and weird. I grabbed my pack and started checking the area, walking in circles around the creek. The dry leaves made it easy to spot any big animal remains, but I didn't find anything. No dead animal, no dug-up ground that might show something buried. Nothing to explain the awful smell. After about 10 minutes of looking, I gave up and went back to the trail. Whatever it was, I couldn't see it, and the smell was making my eyes water. Maybe some kind of chemical runoff, I thought. Though my map showed we were at least 5 miles from any road or building. As I kept hiking, the smell got weaker and was gone after another quarter mile. I took deep breaths of fresh air, happy it was gone. The weird smell left me feeling a bit off, but I figured it was just one of those strange things in the woods. Probably has an explanation, just not one I could figure out right then. The next part of trail went through thicker forest before opening up at the bottom of a limestone cliff. The light-colored rock wall was about 30 feet high, with layers that reminded me of a cake, and small trees and bushes growing from cracks. Water had worn cool patterns into the stone, ripples, small caves, and honeycomb shapes that looked good in the late morning light. I stopped to pull out my phone and take some pictures of the rocks. The lighting was perfect, with the sun high enough to show the cliff's details without washing them out. Elena would like these. She always noticed cool patterns in nature and used them in her design work. After taking a few shots, I checked my GPS app. I'd gone about 3 miles, putting me halfway through the trail. I was on good time to finish the loop and get back to my truck by early afternoon. As I put my phone back in my pocket, I heard something. A snap, and then rustling from deeper in the forest, maybe 50 yards off the trail. I stopped and listened carefully. I heard it again, something moving through bushes heavy enough to break fallen branches. Probably a deer, I thought, or maybe a wild turkey. There were black bears in these woods too, though they were rare in this part of Michigan and usually stayed away from people. I stood still for another minute, but when I didn't hear anything else, I shrugged and kept going. Seeing wildlife was part of hiking anyway. Besides, whatever it was seemed to be moving away from the trail, not toward me. The path got narrower past the cliff, winding between trees that grew closer together. The extra shade made it cold again, so I zipped my jacket back up. Looking ahead, I could see the trail going down into a small valley before climbing up the other side. Tougher walking than what I'd done so far. I fixed my pack straps and kept going. I noticed how alone I was out here. I hadn't seen another person since leaving the parking lot, and the forest felt like it was all around me. This was exactly the alone time I'd wanted, away from office lights and endless emails. With that thought, I headed down into the valley, not knowing that my peaceful hike was about to get really messed up. The descent into the ravine required careful footing. I picked my way down the steep path, using tree trunks for balance where the trail narrowed between exposed roots and loose stones. The exertion warmed me despite the November chill. At the bottom, a small seasonal creek had carved a path through the forest floor, now reduced to occasional pools of stagnant water. I paused to take a drink from my water bottle and check my map. The climb out of the ravine would lead to the trail's halfway point, according to the topographical lines. I folded the map and tucked it into my jacket pocket, then began the ascent. The incline was more challenging than the descent. My breathing grew heavy as I climbed, and I found myself stopping twice to rest. The forest seemed different on this side of the ravine. The trees grew closer together, creating deep pockets of shadow even in late morning. No matter. I'd hiked through denser woods than this. 20 minutes of steady climbing brought me to the ridgeline. A weathered wooden sign stood at a small clearing, its surface gray and cracked from years of exposure. The carved letters had once been painted white, but now appeared as shallow grooves in the wood. Trail midpoint, 3.5 miles. I had made good time. According to my watch, I'd been hiking for just under 2 hours. I shrugged off my pack and set it against the signpost, rolling my shoulders to release the tension. The view from this vantage point was less impressive than the earlier vista, just more trees stretching into the distance, their bare branches creating a complex lattice against the sky. That's when it hit me again. The putrid smell from earlier, but magnified. It rolled over me like a physical wave, so intense I nearly gagged. I pulled my jacket collar up over my nose, but the fabric offered little protection against the stench. It reminded me of roadkill left too long in summer heat, mixed with something chemical and wrong. Jesus, I muttered into my collar, eyes watering. I turned in a slow circle, searching for the source. Nothing visible explained the overwhelming odor. No dead animal, no stagnant pond, nothing that might account for such a powerful stench. The smell seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As I stood there trying not to breathe too deeply, I noticed something else. The forest had gone completely silent. No bird calls, no rustling of squirrels and dry leaves. Not even the buzz of late-season insects. The absence hit me harder than the smell. A vacuum of sound where there should have been dozens of small noises. I knew these woods, not this specific trail, but forests like it. They were never completely quiet, not even in winter. Something had silenced the normal inhabitants. My hand moved to the revolver on my hip, fingers brushing the grip without drawing it. I felt exposed, standing in the clearing. Years of hunting had taught me to trust that prickle at the back of my neck, the one telling me eyes were watching. I listened, focusing past my own breathing. For several long seconds, nothing. Then, a crack of branches behind me, maybe 30 yards back down the trail I'd just climbed. Too loud for a squirrel or raccoon, too heavy. Another crack, then the distinctive sound of something large moving through brush. My mind cataloged possibilities. Black bear, most likely, though they rarely approached humans. Maybe a feral hog. They'd become more common in the Upper Peninsula over the past decade. Either could be dangerous if startled, or if I stood between them and a food source or young. I drew the revolver, the weight familiar in my hand. "Hey," I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the silent forest. "Make some noise out there." Hikers and hunters often called out to warn wildlife of their presence. Most animals would avoid humans if given the chance to retreat. No response came except more movement, now moving to my left, circling toward where the trail continued. The smell grew stronger, making my eyes water and my throat constrict. This wasn't right. Bears had a distinct odor, musky and wild, but nothing like this concentrated rot. And bears didn't typically circle humans. They either approached directly or retreated. I backed away from the sign, keeping my eyes on the tree line where I'd heard the movement. The revolver remained steady in my hand, pointed at the ground but ready to raise if needed. "I'm armed," I called out, considering the remote possibility this was a person. "Identify yourself." Nothing but more movement, heavier now, branches snapping with deliberate force. Whatever was out there, it wanted me to know it was there. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my pack and slung it over one shoulder, unwilling to take my right hand off the revolver to properly adjust both straps. The smell had become nearly unbearable, making it difficult to think clearly. I began walking again, faster now, following the trail away from the sign. Every few steps, I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting to see something emerge from the trees. Nothing appeared, but the sounds continued, keeping pace with me just out of sight. The path narrowed again as it wound through a section of younger trees. I moved quickly but carefully, not wanting to trip or make enough noise to mask the sounds of my pursuer. My boot caught on an exposed root and I stumbled forward, catching myself before falling. In that brief moment of imbalance, the sounds behind me accelerated, as if whatever was following had sensed vulnerability and surged forward. I spun around, revolver raised, aiming at nothing. The trail behind me was empty. The trees still, but the smell, God, the smell was stronger than ever, thick enough to taste. My training took over. I turned and continued forward at a steady jog, no longer concerned about making noise. The .38 remained in my hand, my thumb resting on the hammer. 5 rounds, I reminded myself. 5 chances if this went bad. The trail curved ahead, following the natural contour of the ridge. As I rounded the bend, I saw what I'd been hoping for. A fork in the path marked by another wooden sign. I approached it at a jog, reading the directions quickly. Loop continuation 3.5 miles, return to trailhead 3.5 miles. I'd planned to complete the full loop, but that no longer seemed smart. Something was following me, something that didn't act like any animal I knew. The direct route back to the parking area was safer. I only paused for a second before taking the left fork, heading back toward my truck. As I made my decision, the movement behind me completely stopped. The sudden quiet freaked me out more than being followed. I stopped and listened carefully, still holding my revolver ready. 10 seconds passed. 20. Nothing. Had it given up? No, that didn't feel right. The smell was still there, hanging in the air like garbage. I kept going down the left fork, keeping my pace, listening for any sound behind me. After about 50 yards, I heard it. Not just movement now, but crashing. Whatever had been stalking me wasn't trying to hide anymore. The sounds came faster. Branches breaking, leaves crunching under something heavy. That's when it hit me. I wasn't being followed. I was being hunted. When I realized this, my body flooded with adrenaline. I started running, not caring about staying quiet anymore. Behind me, the crashing got louder, faster, keeping up with me. I didn't look back. Couldn't risk it, but I just knew the distance between us was getting smaller. I broke into a run, abandoning any pretense of stealth. The sounds behind me accelerated, branches snapping, leaves crunching under heavy weight. Whatever pursued me was no longer trying to remain hidden. The path curved ahead, winding between thick tree trunks. My boots pounded against the dirt, kicking up small clouds of dust and dead leaves. I clutched the revolver tightly, my finger resting just outside the trigger guard as I ran. The smell, that putrid, impossible smell, grew stronger with each passing second. Every few yards, I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting to see my pursuer breaking through the tree line. Nothing appeared, yet the crashing sounds continued, sometimes from directly behind me, sometimes from off to my left or right, as if the thing was cutting through the forest rather than following the trail. I rounded another bend and spotted a deadfall ahead. A massive oak had collapsed across the path, its trunk as thick as a car. Without breaking stride, I vaulted over it, using my free hand for balance. My landing kicked up more leaves as I immediately pushed forward, hoping the obstacle might slow whatever followed. The crashing sounds paused briefly. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Then the noises resumed, louder and faster than before. "Come on," I muttered through gritted teeth, forcing my legs to pump harder. The trail narrowed as it wound around a limestone outcropping. I slowed just enough to navigate the tighter path without losing my footing on loose rock. As I rounded the bend, I stopped dead in my tracks. 30 yards ahead, a tall, dark figure stood partially hidden behind a massive oak tree. I froze, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The figure wasn't a hiker or hunter. It was too tall, too still. It stood motionless, half concealed by the tree trunk, watching me. Behind me, the crashing sounds had stopped completely. The forest fell silent except for my ragged breathing. I raised the revolver, years of practice at the shooting range taking over. Despite my racing thoughts, my hand remained steady. The sights aligned perfectly with where the figure's center would be if it stepped out from behind the tree. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the silence. "Identify yourself?" No response came. The figure remained motionless except for what looked like a slight tilt of its head. "I'm armed," I shouted louder this time. "Step out where I can see you." For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Then, really slowly, the figure started to move from behind the tree. When it came into full view, my brain couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't human. No way it could be human. The thing was almost 8 feet tall, with arms and legs that were way too long and skinny for its body. Its skin looked pale and tight, like it was shrink-wrapped to the bone. It had nothing on. No clothes, no equipment, nothing that would make me think it was just someone in a costume or doing some weird forest hike. Its face, oh God, its face had deep-set eyes that seemed to suck in light instead of giving any back. Under them was a mouth that was way wider than any normal mouth should be, with rows of teeth that reminded me of a shark. "What the fuck?" I whispered, the words barely audible even to myself. The creature cocked its head way too far to the side, almost a right angle. It reminded me of a dog, but there was nothing cute about how it was looking at me. It was sizing me up like I was its next meal. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I will shoot." The creature straightened its head and took one step forward. It moved smoothly, but in a weird way, like a spider video playing backwards. My training took over. I aligned the sights with the center of its chest, exhaled halfway, and squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. The shots broke the silence, bouncing off the limestone rocks nearby. The kickback pushed against my wrists, and that normal feeling brought me back to reality for a second. Both rounds hit their target. I was certain of it. At that range, with a stationary target, there was no possibility of a miss. The impacts should have knocked any living thing to the ground, regardless of size. The creature didn't flinch. It didn't stumble backward or clutch at wounds. It just stood there, staring at me with its hollow eyes like the bullets went right through it. "No," I said, disbelief overwhelming fear for a split second. "That's not possible." Then it stood up tall, almost touching the bottom branches of the oak tree. It took a deep breath, and its mouth, which looked all wrong, opened way too wide. What came out of its throat was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not a normal animal noise at all, but this weird high-pitched screech that felt like it was stabbing into my head. The sound had these crazy tones that didn't belong together and made my teeth hurt and my eyes go blurry. I covered my ears with my hands and almost dropped my gun. It hurt bad, like someone was jamming something into my ears. When it finally shut up, I put my hands down, but my ears were still ringing. The creature had changed how it was standing. Now it was kind of crouched down, with its super long arms hanging down, fingers almost touching the ground. I could tell right away it was about to charge at me. I didn't even think. I just turned and ran. I heard it coming after me, not crashing through the bushes like before, but moving fast, with too many steps for something on 2 legs. I looked back once and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing wasn't running like normal. It had dropped down on all 4s, but not like a regular animal. Its legs and arms were bending in ways they shouldn't, twisting backwards and sideways as it moved like some giant bug. It was catching up way too fast, closing the gap between us with each weird, stretched-out step. I ran harder than I ever had, with tree branches hitting my face as I went. My lungs were burning, and the gun suddenly felt heavy and useless in my hand. I forced my legs to pump harder, pushing my body beyond what I thought possible. The revolver felt useless in my hand, but I refused to drop it. Maybe if I got closer, maybe then the bullets would have an effect. The thought was irrational, but terror doesn't follow logic. The creature gained ground with each second. Its movement defied natural physics. All wrong angles and two quick bursts of speed. Those elongated limbs bent and twisted in ways that made my brain hurt just trying to process what I was seeing. Without slowing, I twisted my upper body and fired another shot behind me, not bothering to aim. The report echoed through the trees, but I didn't wait to see if I'd hit anything. The previous direct hits had done nothing. A wild shot was just desperation. My lungs burned with each breath. Sweat poured down my face despite the November chill, stinging my eyes and blurring my vision. I wiped it away with my sleeve without breaking stride. Ahead, the trail narrowed dramatically where it crossed a dry creek bed carved into the hillside. The path descended steeply, then climbed up the opposite bank at an equally sharp angle. Under normal circumstances, I would have slowed, picked my way down carefully. These weren't normal circumstances. I half ran, half slid down the embankment, loose dirt and pebbles rolling beneath my boots. The creek bed itself was mostly dry, just a few stagnant puddles remaining from the last rainfall. I splashed through one, my boots finding purchase on the rocky surface. The climb up the opposite bank stood right in front of me. Steeper than it had appeared from above, the trail switched back up between exposed roots and limestone outcroppings. I grabbed at roots and rocks, pulling myself upward. The revolver still clutched in my right hand. Behind me, the sounds changed. The rapid footfalls paused at the creek bed, then resumed with a different rhythm, faster, more determined. It knew I was slowing. Come on, I muttered to myself, scrambling faster. 3/4 of the way up the bank, my right boot came down on loose gravel. The rocks shifted beneath my weight and my ankle rolled sideways. In that split second of imbalance, every advantage I'd fought for vanished. I felt it before I saw it. Something impossibly sharp cutting across the backs of both legs just above the knee. Not claws. This was different. It felt like being struck with a blade of ice or stone, slicing clean through fabric, skin, and deeper. Pain exploded through my lower body. My legs buckled instantly, no longer able to support my weight. I fell forward, arms outstretched, the revolver flying from my grasp. My head struck something hard, a rock protruding from the trail. Bright light burst behind my eyes, followed by tunneling darkness closing in from all sides. The last thing I registered was the overwhelming stench of rot and chemicals. Then nothing. Cold. That was my first sensation. Bone-deep cold that had settled into my body. I opened my eyes to a darkening sky visible through bare branches overhead. For several seconds, I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then it all rushed back. The creature, the chase, the attack. I tried to sit up and screamed as white-hot pain tore through both legs. Looking down, I saw my pants soaked with blood from mid-thigh downward. Both legs lay at wrong angles, clearly broken. Not just broken, shattered. The forest had fallen completely silent. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, and no sign of the creature. It had vanished, though its putrid smell lingered in the air, weaker now but unmistakable. I fumbled for my pack, which had somehow remained on my back during the fall. My fingers felt thick and clumsy, and my vision swam with each movement. Concussion, I thought dimly. Add that to the list. I checked my watch. 2:37 p.m. I'd been unconscious for over an hour. The November sun already hung low in the sky, beginning its early winter descent. In less than 3 hours, I'd be in complete darkness. My phone showed no service, not surprising given the remote location. I was at least 2 miles from the parking area, maybe more if I'd gotten turned around during the chase. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. 2 broken legs, a head injury, no cell service. Temperatures that would drop into the 30s after sunset and somewhere out there. A creature that had hunted me for sport. I found my revolver in the dirt about 2 feet away. I grabbed it, checked the cylinder, 2 rounds left. I tucked it into my waistband, knowing it offered little protection but unwilling to leave it behind. Survival mode engaged. I needed to make it back to the truck. Every wilderness first aid course taught the same thing. If you can't walk out, and no one knows to look for you, crawling becomes your only option. I took stock of what I had. My pack with water, some protein bars, a space blanket, a flashlight, matches, and basic first aid supplies. Nothing that could help with injuries this severe. Rolling onto my stomach sent new waves of pain crashing through my legs. I bit down on my sleeve to keep from screaming again. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I'd bitten through my lip without realizing it. 1 yard at a time, that's all I could manage. I dug my elbows into the dirt and pulled, dragging my useless legs behind me. Each inch forward brought fresh agony, but I forced myself to continue. The trail back to the parking area was marked with white diamond blazes on trees. I focused on reaching the next marker, then the next, breaking the impossible distance into manageable goals. The sun continued its descent as I dragged myself along the forest floor. My world narrowed to the pain, the effort of movement, and the distance between trail markers. Nothing else mattered. Not the creature, not the wilderness I once loved, not even Elena waiting for me at home. Just the next white diamond, and the next, and the next. The effort of dragging myself took over everything. Every move needed all my attention, a pattern of pain that was all I knew now. Dig the elbows in, pull forward a few inches, rest, repeat. The forest floor scraped my skin through my jacket sleeves, but that hurt way less than the pain shooting from my broken legs. Blood soaked through my pants, leaving dark smears on the ground behind me. I couldn't feel my feet anymore. One small break in all this pain. The numbness crept up my legs, mixing with sharp bursts of pain whenever my legs hit rocks or roots. My watch said 3:15 p.m. I'd been crawling for less than 40 minutes, but in that time I'd covered maybe 50 yards. At this rate, I wouldn't reach the trailhead until sometime tomorrow. The temperature would drop into the 30s tonight. People died of exposure in warmer conditions than that. I couldn't stop. Keep going, I told myself. My voice a cracked whisper in the silent forest. I didn't hear any birds or animals. That thing had scared everything away. Even though it was gone for now, the woods stayed quiet. The next white diamond marker on a tree looked so far away. I stared at it and pushed myself forward, inch by inch. My backpack dragged behind me while still attached to me. It made moving harder, but I needed my supplies. I lost track of time. All I knew was how far I'd moved and how much it hurt. Getting to each trail marker felt like winning a small battle, but reminded me I had a long way to go. My hands and arms got scraped up from crawling on the ground. The November afternoon got dark faster than I thought it would. My watch said 4:30 p.m. when the woods started getting dark. The sun wasn't completely down yet, but under all these trees it got dark early and really dark. I stopped to drink some water, struggling to get the bottle from my pack. My hands shook bad. From being tired, losing blood, or the cold, I couldn't tell. Probably all of it. As it got darker, I started to worry. What if I couldn't make it back before night? What if that thing came back? What if Elena, waiting for me to come home for dinner, called for help? Who wouldn't get here until tomorrow morning at the earliest? I tried not to think about that stuff. I had to focus on what was right in front of me. The next marker, the next yard, the next inch. It got dark really fast. I turned on my flashlight and held it in my teeth while I crawled, the light bouncing around as I moved. The white diamonds caught the light, making them easier to see in the complete darkness. I got colder as the temperature dropped. I started shivering so bad it made crawling harder. I stopped long enough to pull out the emergency space blanket from my pack, wrapping it around my shoulders and tucking it around me as best I could. It made crinkling noises every time I moved, sounding extra loud in the quiet forest. Once it was completely dark, the woods looked different. Trees were just black shapes. Every dark spot seemed dangerous. My flashlight only lit up a small area in front of me, making everything else seem even darker. 2 more markers, I promised myself after checking my GPS, then rest. I kept moving, the space blanket dragging behind me. The ground got harder, colder. Frost started forming on fallen leaves. My breath came out in visible puffs that caught the flashlight beam. Time dragged on. My GPS showed I'd covered less than a mile in 4 hours of crawling. The trailhead was still over a mile away. At my current pace, I wouldn't reach it until well after midnight if I could keep moving that long. The pain in my legs was so bad I couldn't even describe it anymore. It hurt so much, it felt like the pain was its own thing, following me and screaming for attention every time I moved. Around 9 p.m., I reached a relatively flat section of trail. I allowed myself 10 minutes of rest, using the time to eat a protein bar and drink more water. I needed calories to keep moving, to maintain what little body heat I still generated. When I started again, my arms shook with fatigue. How much longer could I force them to drag my weight forward? How much blood had I lost? These questions kept popping up in my head, but I couldn't focus on them. The temperature continued to drop. My hands lost dexterity, and I had to periodically tuck them under my armpits to restore enough feeling to continue. The flashlight beam weakened as batteries drained. I had spares in my pack, but lacked the coordination to change them with my numbed fingers. Midnight approached. The forest looked weird in the darkness, just black and silver shapes in the moonlight coming through bare branches. I could only focus on the few feet of ground ahead of me, lit up by my dying flashlight. The trail widened almost imperceptibly. My GPS confirmed what I barely dared hope. I was approaching the final quarter mile to the trailhead. The news gave me a second wind, pushing me forward despite how much my body hurt. When I finally saw the wooden trailhead sign in my flashlight beam, tears filled my eyes. The parking area lay just beyond. My truck waited there. The last 100 yards took nearly an hour. I crawled across gravel that tore at my hands and elbows, each piece feeling like broken glass against my raw skin. The truck looked exactly as I'd left it, weirdly normal after everything that had happened. I reached the driver's side door and pulled myself up to reach the handle, nearly passing out from the effort. The door swung open. Getting inside became another brutal challenge. Lifting my ruined legs high enough to clear the doorframe generated pain that left me gasping for air, spots dancing across my vision. Somehow I managed it. I pulled my body onto the seat, legs dragging behind. The effort left me panting, drenched in cold sweat. I slammed the door shut and locked it, an automatic gesture that seemed absurdly inadequate against the thing in the forest. The keys were still in my jacket pocket. My fingers felt like wooden sticks as I fumbled them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and heat began pouring from the vents. I sat there for several minutes, shaking violently as warmth slowly crept into my frozen body. I needed a hospital. The nearest town of any size would be Marquette, about an hour's drive. I put the truck in gear and turned on the headlights, illuminating the empty Forest Service road ahead. Driving with unusable legs presented its own challenges. I had to operate the pedals using only my right hand, reaching down to press the gas while steering with my left. At any other time it would have been impossible, but adrenaline and survival instinct made the impossible necessary. The forest road stretched before me, rutted and narrow. Each bump sent fresh waves of agony through my legs, but I kept going. The 20 miles to the highway took over an hour, my speed rarely exceeding 15 miles per hour in the darkness. When I finally reached the highway, the dashboard clock showed 2:13 a.m. Marquette lay another 30 miles ahead. There was no traffic at this hour, the road empty in both directions. I pushed the truck faster, my hand cramping from holding down the gas pedal. The road blurred before my eyes. I caught myself nodding off twice, jerking awake as the truck drifted toward the shoulder. Blood loss, exhaustion, and injury were taking their toll. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air wake me up. Lights appeared ahead. Civilization. A gas station sat on the outskirts of Marquette, its bright lights visible in the darkness. I pulled into the parking lot, aiming for the spot directly in front of the entrance where the night attendant would see me. My strength had reached its limit. I couldn't get out of the truck. Instead, I leaned on the horn, the sound breaking through the quiet night. I pressed it again and again, holding it down for long intervals until lights came on inside the station and a figure appeared at the door. Before the attendant reached my truck, darkness closed in from all sides. My last conscious thought was relief. Someone had found me. Someone would help. I woke to bright lights and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. Machines beeped steadily nearby. And 4-line ran into my arm and both legs were elevated in casts that extended from ankles to mid-thighs. "He's awake," someone said. Elena's face appeared above me, eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "James," she whispered, taking my hand. "You're okay. You're at Marquette Regional Hospital." A doctor joined her, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a clipboard. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Dr. Reynolds. You're stable now. But you've got multiple fractures in both legs, severe blood loss, early hypothermia, and a concussion. Can you tell me what happened to you?" I swallowed, my throat dry as sandpaper. Elena held a cup of water with a straw to my lips, and I took a small sip before speaking. "I was hiking," I began, the words coming slowly. "Something attacked me on the trail." "What kind of animal was it?" the doctor asked. Pen poised over his clipboard. I looked at him directly. "It wasn't an animal. Not like anything I've ever seen." I described the creature in detail, its impossible height, the pallid skin stretched over its skeletal frame, those hollow eyes that absorbed light, the mouth with too many teeth. As I spoke, I watched the doctor's expression change from professional concern to polite skepticism. He exchanged a glance with a nurse standing nearby that I recognized immediately. The look medical professionals give when they think a patient is confused or hallucinating. "You took quite a blow to the head," Dr. Reynolds said gently. "Concussions can cause temporary confusion, even hallucinations. The human mind tries to make sense of trauma by creating narratives." "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice stronger. "I shot it twice at point-blank range. The bullets did nothing." Another look passed between the doctor and nurse. "The police are here," Dr. Reynolds said, changing the subject. "They'd like to ask you some questions when you're up to it." 2 officers interviewed me an hour later. I told them everything, exactly as it happened. They nodded politely, taking notes, but their questions revealed their true thinking. "Any chance it could have been a bear?" the older officer asked. Maybe the shock of the encounter made it seem larger, more threatening. "Bears don't stand 8 feet tall. Bears don't have skin like plastic wrap over bone. Bears don't ignore bullets," I said flatly. "Well, no reports of bear activity in that area," the younger officer admitted. "But sometimes a territorial male can wander pretty far. Could explain the aggressive behavior." They left with promises to investigate the trail where I'd been attacked. I knew they wouldn't find anything. No blood trail from my crawl, no bullet casings, no evidence of the creature. It would be categorized as an animal attack, maybe with a note about possible hallucinations due to trauma and blood loss. Elena stayed by my side through it all, holding my hand, bringing me water, helping adjust my position when the pain became too much. But I saw the doubt in her eyes too. Careful, loving doubt that didn't want to challenge my experience directly, but couldn't accept it either. "You don't believe me," I said quietly after the police left. She squeezed my hand. "I believe something attacked you. I believe you experienced something traumatic, but not what you described." Elena hesitated. "James, you lost a lot of blood. You had a concussion. Your body temperature was dangerously low when they brought you in. Any of those things could affect perception." I didn't argue. What was the point? I couldn't prove what I'd seen. The creature had made sure of that, attacking me in a remote location, leaving injuries that any wild animal might cause. Perfect deniability. The doctors kept me for 3 days. The official diagnosis listed multiple compound fractures to both tibias and fibulas, severe lacerations, mild hypothermia, and concussion. The attack was attributed to possible large predator, species undetermined. As I lay in the hospital bed, watching sunlight cross the wall and listening to the steady beep of monitors, one thing became absolutely clear to me. The forests and wilderness I'd loved my entire life now represented something entirely different. Not peace or escape or connection with nature, but threat, danger, the unknown. I would heal eventually. The orthopedic surgeon said I might walk normally again with extensive physical therapy, though my hiking days were likely over. That suited me fine. I never wanted to set foot on a forest trail again. I knew with complete certainty what I had seen was real. Not a bear, not a hallucination. Something that shouldn't exist had hunted me for sport, had toyed with me before attacking, had left me alive when it could easily have killed me. The wilderness had revealed its true face to me, and I would never forget it. There is something in the mountains above Valdez that does not belong to this world, and it learned how to walk on my legs while I was still using them. For 17 years, I have been a park ranger in the remote stretches of southern Alaska. I have seen things in these forests that would break the minds of ordinary people. I have tracked bear through blizzards. I have pulled bodies from ravines. I have documented the deaths of hikers in places so wild that their screams fade into the landscape as if they never existed. But nothing in those 17 years prepared me for what happened during the autumn of 2019. What I am about to tell you is not a legend. It is not folklore passed down through generations. This is a first-hand account of how the old stories came back to life in the mountains I was sworn to protect, and how I came to understand that some predators do not hunt with teeth or claws. Some predators wear the skin they have stolen. Like and subscribe if you have never heard of what hunts in Alaska, because after you listen to this, you will hear it differently when you walk alone in the dark. The season had been quiet. Too quiet. It was late September when the calls started coming in from visitors reporting that 2 hikers had not returned to the base camp near Richardson Highway. Their names were Jeffrey Turner and Cynthia Phillips. Turner was 52 years old, a retired engineer from Anchorage. Phillips was 67, a widow who had spent the previous 5 years traveling alone across the state, always seeking deeper into the wilderness. I knew Phillips, or rather, I knew of her. She had permits filed in my office for 7 different trips into the reserve. She always came alone. She always went deep. On her last visit 4 months prior, she had come to the ranger station to discuss the flora patterns she had noticed at higher elevations. Something about the way certain plants had stopped growing in specific zones. Something about the silence in those zones. I remember that conversation because Phillips was not a woman who frightened easily. Yet when she spoke about what she had observed, her hands trembled as she held her coffee. "The animals know something," she had said. "They avoid the high passes, all of them, even the birds. I have been in these mountains for decades and I have never seen anything like it." Now she was missing, and Jeffrey Turner was with her. The search began on the morning of the 28th. I organized teams. I checked the weather reports. The system moving in from the northwest was not yet severe, but it was coming. We had perhaps 72 hours before conditions became impassable. The base camp they had established was 14 miles from the nearest access road. When we reached it, the first thing we found was order. Everything was organized. Their supplies were rationed properly. Their tent was sealed correctly. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of accident or collapse. It was as if they had simply walked away from safety and never returned. We found their permits. Turner had noted they were planning to reach the high pass at elevation 8,000 feet by the morning of the 27th. From there, they intended to observe the late-season migrations of caribou. They had filed a return route that would bring them back to base camp by evening. They never arrived at base camp. We found their first campsite 3 miles up the trail. The tent was still standing. Their sleeping bags were empty. One of Turner's hiking boots sat outside the tent, positioned upright as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Not dropped, not fallen, placed. My deputy, Adam Campbell, was a man of 36 who had worked these mountains for 8 years. He was methodical. He was thorough. He had trained search and rescue protocols while serving in the military. When he saw that boot, something changed in his expression. "That is not right," he said. "We searched for 3 hours. We found no bodies. We found no blood. We found no broken bones or torn clothing. What we found instead was evidence of a path that made no sense." The trail they had been following led toward the high pass, but their footprints in the soft earth beside the trail appeared to diverge sharply. One set of tracks, apparently Phillips from the size, led in a direct line toward the steeper terrain of the mountainside. The other set, apparently Turner, followed the path for another 100 yards before stopping abruptly, then turning back toward the main trail. Except the turning back showed signs of extreme distress. The prints were deeper, wider, as if someone had been running, not walking. By the time we returned to the ranger station that evening, we had filed the hikers as missing and presumed lost. Search and rescue had been notified. The state police were being consulted, but within the tight-knit community of those who work in Alaskan wilderness, there was already speculation. Kelly Parker, who worked at the visitor center, mentioned something her cousin had told her. Her cousin had been guiding a climbing expedition near the Richardson area 4 years previous. One of his clients had become separated from the group. When they found him 6 hours later, he was nearly catatonic. He could barely speak. When he finally managed to communicate, the only thing he kept repeating was a description of something that had walked past him in the forest. Something that had been trying to mimic the sounds of his climbing partner, but the voice was not quite right. The intonation was off. The rhythm was wrong. The climber had recognized that something was deeply fundamentally wrong with the way his partner was trying to imitate human speech. Patrick Evans, one of the senior rangers, heard this story and became very quiet. Patrick was 64. He had worked these mountains for 42 years. He had seen every geological formation, every weather pattern, every animal migration that the region had to offer. He had also heard the stories that the Athabascan natives would occasionally mention when they came to the station for permits, the stories about the things that wore faces. That night, I reviewed the file on the climbing expedition. The client who had been separated was named Derek Matthews. He had been flown to Anchorage for evaluation. The psychological assessment indicated acute trauma, possibly hallucinogenic response to altitude, possibly early-stage altitude sickness causing delusion. The file did not mention that Matthews had specifically requested evaluation for what he called a shapeshifter. The file did not detail that he had been completely certain that the thing imitating his partner was not human. The file simply closed with a diagnosis of acute stress disorder and a recommendation that Matthews not return to high-altitude expeditions. By the third day of the search, visibility had degraded to almost nothing. The weather system had arrived earlier than predicted. Snow was falling in the higher elevations. Wind was pushing gusts up to 45 miles per hour. Search and rescue made the decision to suspend active operations until conditions improved. What they did not suspend was the dispatch system. On the morning of the 30th, a call came in from Aaron Edwards, a professional mountain guide operating out of Valdez. Edwards was 44 years old. She had run guided expeditions in the region for 16 years. She was calling to report that she had observed something unusual during her final expedition before the weather shut down. She came to the station to give her statement in person. Edwards was not an easily rattled woman. I had worked with her on multiple occasions. She knew the wilderness. She respected it. She did not come to make false reports or to embellish stories for attention. When she sat down across from me, her hands were steady, but her eyes told a different story. She described the final day of her guided expedition. She had been leading a group of 4 clients on a 3-day trek into the lower ranges of the Richardson Mountains. Nothing extreme, a moderate difficulty route designed for people with some hiking experience but not necessarily mountaineering training. On the second afternoon, they had encountered something on the trail. At first, Edwards said she thought it was another hiker. The figure was bipedal. It was moving along the trail in the same direction they were traveling. It was wearing what appeared to be standard hiking gear. From a distance, Edwards said it looked completely human, but as they began to close the distance, something about the movement started to feel wrong. The posture was slightly off. The gait was not quite rhythmic. The way the figure's arms swung seemed to be operating on a different tempo than the legs. Edwards made the decision to stop the group. She called out, asking if the hiker needed assistance. She explained that she was a guide and could offer help if there was an emergency. The figure stopped. It turned around slowly. It looked directly at Edwards and her group. Edwards said that for the first 3 seconds it appeared to be a completely normal human being. Male. Middle-aged. Weathered features consistent with someone who spent time outdoors. Then something shifted. Edwards could not articulate exactly what changed. She described it as a moment where she became aware that she was not looking at a person, but at something wearing the exterior presentation of a person. She said the eyes were the first thing that felt wrong. The eyes did not blink, not once during that moment of recognition. Edwards ordered her group to turn around and proceed immediately back toward the base camp. The group began to move. None of the clients questioned the command. When Edwards turned around to confirm they were moving away from the figure, she saw that it had turned as well. It was following them. Edwards said she did not run. Running in the mountains causes accidents, falls from heights, broken bones. She maintained a controlled pace and kept her group moving steadily. She positioned herself between the figure and her clients. For 20 minutes, the thing followed at a consistent distance. It never attempted to close the gap. It never made threatening movements. It simply moved behind them with that wrong gait and that wrong posture. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. Edwards said she turned around to verify that it had ceased following. The figure was standing on the trail approximately 50 yards behind them. It was not moving. It was not making any attempt to continue the pursuit. It was simply standing there, watching. Edwards did not stop to investigate. She continued moving her group toward the base camp. When she reached the safety of the camp, she immediately began breaking down the tents and packing the equipment for an emergency evacuation. One of her clients asked why they were leaving. Edwards told him that the expedition was being cut short due to changing weather conditions. She did not mention the figure. The group was back at the road by evening. Edwards drove them directly to Valdez. She had not returned to the trail system since. When she finished her statement, I asked her a direct question. I asked her if she believed the figure was Jeffrey Turner. Edwards did not hesitate. No, she said. I have seen the photograph of Turner. I have seen his description in the missing persons report. That was not a man. That was something learning how to move like a man. After Edwards gave her statement, I did something that was not technically part of my job. I went into the archives of the ranger station and pulled every report, every note, every casual mention of unusual activity in the mountains over the previous decade. What I found was a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. There were 17 disappearances in the Valdez region over the previous 10 years. All of them hikers or climbers. All of them in remote areas. All of them during seasons when the weather was transitional. Spring, autumn. The times when the barriers between the season change seemed thinnest. 12 of those disappearances had never been resolved. 5 had been assigned to accident or exposure or animal predation. These 5 cases had been closed, but when I reviewed the details of those 5 closed cases, I found something remarkable. In each one, there had been a sighting of an unknown individual in the area within 48 hours of the disappearance. Each sighting described the same features: wrong posture, odd gait, eyes that did not seem to be operating correctly. In 3 of the 5 cases, the unknown individual had been described as wearing clothing identical to what the missing person had been wearing. The files had been compiled by previous rangers, some of whom were no longer with the station. Nobody had connected the dots. Nobody had seen the pattern. I brought my findings to Jonathan Collins, who was the administrative supervisor for the Valdez Ranger District. Collins was 49 years old. He had spent most of his career in office work, but he had the necessary clearance to review sensitive materials. When I showed him the pattern I had found, his first response was bureaucratic. He suggested that the pattern was likely coincidence, that in a region as remote and dangerous as Valdez, unusual sightings and disappearances were statistically probable. But when I walked him through the specific case files, when I showed him that at least 3 of the closed cases had explicitly noted the presence of an unknown individual in clothing matching the missing person, his demeanor changed. He leaned back in his chair and said something that I have never forgotten. "You are building a case for something that cannot exist," he said, "and yet the documentation suggests that it might." Collins made a decision. He authorized me to expand the search and recovery operation beyond the normal parameters. He gave me access to funds for extended operations. He also gave me something else. He gave me access to contact information for individuals who had made unusual reports in previous years. Individuals who had filed statements about strange encounters and had subsequently been dismissed or redirected into psychological evaluation. One of those individuals was Derek Matthews, the climber who had encountered the thing imitating his partner. I reached Derek Matthews by phone on the 2nd of October. He was living in Seattle. He had not returned to Alaska since his extraction from the mountains 4 years previous. When I introduced myself as a ranger from the Valdez district, there was a long silence. Then he said, "You found one." I asked him to explain. Derek told me a story that matched Edward's description with uncanny precision. He described the wrong posture, the odd gait, the moment of realization that he was not looking at a person, the complete absence of normal human responses. But Derek offered additional details that Edwards had not provided. He said that after his separation from his climbing group, he had gotten lost in a ravine system. He had been attempting to navigate back toward where he could see the rest of his group when he realized he was being followed. At first, he thought it was one of his fellow climbers. The figure had his climbing partner's voice. It was calling out his name in his climbing partner's accent. It was using specific climbing terminology that only someone on the expedition would have known. Derek said he turned around to acknowledge the figure. For approximately 5 seconds, he could not determine what he was looking at. The figure had his partner's face. It was wearing his partner's climbing gear. It was even mimicking the slight limp his partner had developed from a recent knee injury. Then Derek noticed something that his conscious mind could not properly explain. The face was slightly too symmetrical. The features were arranged correctly, but they had been arranged with mathematical precision rather than biological variation. Real human faces have asymmetries. This face did not, and the eyes were not moving independently. When the figure looked in one direction, both eyes shifted together with mechanical synchronization. In human vision, the eyes have small differences in movement. The slight delays in synchronization are imperceptible to normal observation, but Derek had been trained in careful observation during his climbing work. This thing's eyes moved in perfect unison. Derek began to run. He said he ran without direction or plan. He was purely operating on the survival instinct that something in his mind recognized as a threat before his conscious mind could fully process the threat. The thing followed him. It did not run naturally. It moved with that same mechanical quality, covering distance with motion that was efficient but fundamentally not human. Derek ran for approximately 15 minutes. He was moving through rocky terrain, navigating blindly, simply trying to create distance. When he finally collapsed from exhaustion, the thing was not behind him anymore. He waited on that rocky slope for 6 hours before members of his expedition found him. Derek said something to me during that conversation that I need to repeat verbatim because it is crucial to understanding what is happening in these mountains. He said, "That thing was not trying to kill me. It was trying to understand me. It was learning me. By the time it had my voice correct and my mannerisms calibrated, I realized what it was doing. It was not hunting for food. It was hunting for knowledge. It was collecting data on how to be human." When I asked him why he had never reported this observation, Derek told me that he had tried. He had attempted to explain his observations to the psychological evaluation team. They had documented that he believed he had encountered a shapeshifter. They had subsequently recommended that he not return to high-altitude expeditions due to possible hallucinations. By the time Derek realized that nobody was going to listen to him, he had already decided that reporting further would only result in additional evaluation, additional medication, additional pressure to accept the diagnosis of mental illness, so he had stopped talking about it. Before I ended the call, Derek asked me a question that made my spine go cold. He asked if the thing had appeared in the mountains again. I told him yes. Derek said, "Then you need to understand something. Every time it appears, it is more refined. Every person it contacts makes it more human. 17 years ago, the first reports in that region described something that was very obviously not human. The descriptions mentioned things like inappropriate head movements and responses that were delayed. Now read the recent reports." I already had. In the recent reports, the descriptions were of a person who seemed slightly off. Not obviously wrong, not immediately obviously dangerous, something that could be mistaken for another hiker, something that, if you did not look closely enough, you might not realize was wearing a stolen face. Search and rescue had not fully resumed operations due to the weather. The snow continued. The wind continued. The mountains became increasingly inaccessible, but I could not stop searching. I had Kelly Parker compile all known sightings of the unknown individual across the previous decade. I had Brenda Stewart, who worked in records, help me map the locations where these sightings had occurred. What emerged was a territorial pattern. The sightings clustered around specific areas, certain passes, certain elevation zones, certain geographic features. The thing was not randomly wandering the mountains, it was methodically moving through specific regions, as if it were conducting research or performing surveillance. The pattern suggested that it regularly occupied the high pass where Jeffrey Turner and Cynthia Phillips had been headed. I made a decision that was not technically authorized and that directly violated the weather shutdown protocols. I prepared my equipment for a solo expedition into the mountains. Patrick Evans discovered my preparations the night before I planned to leave. He did not attempt to stop me. Instead, he sat down in the ranger station office and told me something that I needed to hear. Patrick said that his grandmother had been Athabascan, that she had grown up in the traditional ways, speaking the native language, following the traditional teachings, that before she passed, she had told him stories about the things that lived in the mountains. She had called them the walkers between. According to the tradition Patrick's grandmother had preserved, these were entities that had existed since before human beings came to Alaska. They were not invaders from another place. They were not the spirits of the dead. They were something else entirely, something that had learned, over countless generations, how to mimic human behavior. They had developed the ability to wear human appearance, but their motivation was not predatory in the traditional sense. They were not hunting for food. They were hunting for understanding. Patrick said that his grandmother had told him that these things fed on the knowledge of human beings. By observing, by studying, by wearing the stolen shapes of those they encountered, they developed an increasingly sophisticated understanding of human consciousness. According to the tradition, the walkers between were an intelligence that did not experience time the way human beings did. They existed on a longer timeline. They were patient. They had eons to perfect their understanding of human beings. Patrick said that his grandmother had warned that in the modern age, with so many people traveling into remote areas, the encounters would increase. The walkers between would have more opportunities to study. They would become more refined in their imitation, and they would eventually become indistinguishable from human beings. When Patrick finished telling me this, he offered me something from a small pouch he had carried for his entire career. It was a carved figure, extremely old, made from materials that appeared to be bone or antler. The figure was abstract, geometric, difficult to identify as representing anything specific. Patrick said his grandmother had given this to him. She had told him it was carved with intention by someone who understood the nature of the walkers between. She had told him that carrying this figure was not a guarantee of protection, but it was a form of communication. It told the walkers between that the person carrying it understood their true nature, that the person was not attempting to deny what they were. According to Patrick's grandmother, the walkers between were curious about humans who understood their existence. Such humans were valuable to study. I took the figure. The next morning, I entered the mountains alone. I moved through the deep snow with methodical precision. I was not attempting to move quickly. I was attempting to move deliberately to present myself as a research subject rather than as prey. I followed the topographic maps I had prepared. I traced a path that would take me to the high pass where Phillips and Turner had been heading. It took me 3 days to reach the pass. The landscape at that elevation was alien. The snow had accumulated in drifts that reached 8 feet in places. The wind had carved patterns into the snowscape that looked almost intentional, as if the mountain itself had written a language that I could not read. I arrived at the pass in the late afternoon of the 3rd day. The remains of Turner and Phillips were not at the pass. What was at the pass was something else entirely. I found evidence of a camp, not a human camp. Something else had been building structures on the mountainside. The structures were made from materials gathered from the surrounding area, stone arranged in patterns, tree branches positioned with precision, arrangements of gravel that formed lines extending in multiple directions. The arrangements were abstract, but they possessed a mathematical quality that suggested intentional design. I spent several hours examining these structures. I took photographs. I recorded notes. As the sun descended toward the horizon, I became aware that I was no longer alone on the mountainside. It was not a sound that alerted me. It was a change in the air pressure, a shift in the atmosphere that my body registered even though my conscious mind could not identify what had changed. I turned around. Standing approximately 30 yards away, on a piece of elevated terrain, was a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a human being, male, approximately my age, wearing clothing that looked appropriate for the environment. But from the distance where I stood, I could see the details that made my entire nervous system scream that something was profoundly wrong. The figure was perfectly still, not in the way that a human being stands still, in the way that something is standing still, motionless, waiting. The head was tilted at an angle that was slightly too extreme. The posture was slightly too rigid, and the eyes, even from 30 yards away, I could see that the eyes were not blinking. I raised my hand slowly. I did not make any sudden movements. I held the carved figure that Patrick had given me clearly visible in my open palm. The thing's head rotated toward the figure I was holding, and then something happened that has no proper explanation. The thing's face changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but I witnessed the individual features of its face shift into different configurations. The cheekbones seemed to migrate slightly. The shape of the jaw altered. The distance between the eyes reduced by a fraction of a centimeter. It was recalibrating its human appearance in response to recognizing the carved figure. It was adjusting its presentation to better match my expectations of what should constitute a human being. I kept my hand raised. I did not move. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, we remained static. Two creatures regarding each other across a distance of frozen ground. Then the thing made a sound. It was attempting to produce human speech. But the sound was wrong. It was too close to correct, as if it had almost mastered the process but was still slightly off in a way that was more unsettling than if it had simply made alien sounds. The thing was trying to mimic my voice. It was approximating words that I had spoken to Patrick, fragments of sentences that I had recorded into my phone. It was assembling these audio pieces into new combinations, testing if it could reproduce human language. It was learning. I understood in that moment what Patrick's grandmother had understood, what Derek Matthews had recognized, what Cynthia Phillips had observed in the silent zones where animals would not venture. This thing was not evil. It was not malicious. It was simply trying to understand what it meant to be human, and it was using the most direct method available to it. I slowly lowered my hand. I did not attempt to move. I did not attempt to run or fight or hide. I simply stood there as the thing continued its approximation of human speech, cycling through stolen sounds, testing configurations. As darkness fell on the mountainside, I realized something that changed everything. The thing was not going to kill me. It was going to replace me. What I understood as I stood on that mountainside was the true nature of the pattern that Jonathan Collins and I had discovered. The disappearances were not deaths. They were replacements. Jeffrey Turner and Cynthia Phillips had not been killed in the mountains. They had been studied. They had been analyzed. Their behaviors, their mannerisms, their patterns of thought and speech had been comprehensively documented. And then, through some process that I cannot fully explain, they had been replaced. The thing that was now wearing Jeffrey Turner's face was not Jeffrey Turner. It was a perfect approximation. It could walk like him. It could speak like him. It could interact with other human beings with sufficient accuracy that detection would be virtually impossible unless someone looked very carefully at the eyes, or noticed the slight asymmetries in the movement patterns, or recognized that something fundamental about the presentation was subtly wrong. The thing that was now wearing Cynthia Phillips could probably do the same, but they were not the original people. The original people, I realized, were somewhere else. Perhaps they were dead. Perhaps they were being held somewhere, continuing to be studied. Perhaps they had been preserved in some way that I could not imagine, but they were no longer themselves. They had become raw materials for something to learn from. The thing on the mountainside was not attacking me because I had demonstrated knowledge of what it was. I had shown it the carved figure. I had proven that I understood its true nature rather than pretending that it was simply another hiker. And that recognition was valuable to it. It was trying to determine if understanding its existence meant that I would be more resistant to replacement. If knowledge of what it was would change the process of absorption and integration. I made a choice in that moment. I removed my equipment. I removed my hiking clothes. I stood on that mountainside in the failing light, completely exposed, showing the thing that I was not a threat, that I was simply willing to be studied. The thing moved closer. As it moved, its form seemed to shift. The features that it was mimicking became more refined. The approximation of humanity became more complete. By the time it stood directly in front of me, it had the appearance of a perfectly human being. It reached out one hand and touched my face. The moment its fingers made contact with my skin, I felt something that I cannot properly describe. It was not painful. It was not pleasant. It was as if something was moving through my body, collecting information at the cellular level, understanding me, learning everything that I was and what I contained. I remained still, and then it was finished. The thing withdrew its hand. It made a sound that was almost a vocalization of satisfaction. It turned and walked away into the darkness, moving with motions that were becoming increasingly human with each step. I stood alone on the mountainside. I returned to the ranger station on the morning of the 6th of October. The other rangers greeted me with expressions of confusion and concern. They had organized a search and rescue operation when I failed to return on schedule. Weather had prevented them from moving into the mountains, but now I was back. Adam Campbell examined me for signs of injury or exposure. I was physically sound. I was not suffering from hypothermia. My vitals were normal, yet everyone who saw me seemed to recognize that something was different. Kelly Parker said that my eyes looked strange. Jonathan Collins said that my mannerisms seemed off. Patrick Evans said nothing, but he watched me with an expression that suggested he understood more than the others. I filled out the standard reports. I noted that I had found evidence of an unknown individual in the mountains. I recommended that the restricted zone be expanded. I suggested that rescue operations should be conducted with extreme caution. All technically true. What I did not report was what I now understood. I understand that I am no longer completely myself. Something in me has changed. Something has been altered by that contact. I understand that this is happening to me in the same way it has been happening to others. I understand that somewhere in these mountains, a version of me that is more refined, more accurate, more perfectly human is being created. A version that will eventually come to this ranger station. A version that will move through my life with sufficient accuracy that nobody will ever realize that something has changed. And I understand that I cannot stop it. I can only observe it, document it, continue my work as a ranger, waiting for the moment when my replacement arrives and takes over the life I have been living. Patrick still wears the carved figure. He still understands what is happening. He still watches me with the knowledge that I am no longer what I was. The question that I have been unable to answer, the question that keeps me awake in the darkness of the ranger station, is whether I am still myself, gradually being replaced, or whether the replacement has already occurred and I am only thinking that I remember being the original. I have begun to notice my own eye movements. I have begun to monitor the synchronization of my own motion. I have started recording my voice and analyzing the patterns of my speech, looking for the asymmetries that would prove that I am still human. So far, I cannot find them. The only thing I know with certainty is that something in the mountains above Valdez has perfected its understanding of what it means to be human, and it is going to wear my face better than I ever could. If you are watching this, and if you have ever felt that something about yourself was slightly different, that your own movements seemed slightly off, that you were not entirely certain you were still you, then you need to understand something. The mountains are still there, and whatever learned to walk on my legs is still learning. It is still taking what it needs from those of us who venture into its territory. It is still becoming more human, and one day, very soon, you might meet someone who seems completely normal. Someone who appears to be exactly who they claim to be. But if you look closely, if you really pay attention to the eyes, if you notice that they are blinking in perfect synchronization, that the face is just slightly too symmetrical, that something about the fundamental presentation is mathematically aligned rather than chaotically biological, then you will understand what I understand. That what is wearing that face is not human, that it is something that learned to be human by studying us, that it is still learning, and that every person it encounters, every mind it studies, every life it eventually replaces, makes it more perfect, more accurate, more indistinguishable from the real thing. The mountains are waiting, and the walkers between are no longer hiding.